On December 8, 2019, a man emerged from Kalyan Junction railway station carrying a large, heavy black bag. Kalyan Junction is a major railway station on the central line of the Mumbai suburban railway network, located at the junction of the northeastern and southeastern lines of the Mumbai suburban division of the Central Railway, 54 kilometers northeast of Mumbai. At 5:15 a.m., dawn was just breaking and the sun had not yet risen. Despite the early hour, Kalyan Junction is always busy because it operates 24 hours a day with trains arriving and departing constantly. As a result, many auto rickshaws are typically waiting outside the station, especially during nighttime. In India, auto rickshaws are motorized versions of traditional manually pulled or cycle rickshaws. They are usually owned and operated by private individuals. A man with a heavy black bag approached an auto rickshaw driver outside the station and asked for a ride to Bhiwandi. The distance from Kalyan Junction to Bhiwandi was only 3 miles and would take approximately 15 minutes. However, the rickshaw driver immediately noticed a terrible smell coming from the man's bag. The man said he had some rotten vegetables in his bag that he planned to throw into the river on the way. The smell was so strong that the rickshaw driver refused to take him to Bhiwandi. The man walked over to another nearby auto rickshaw driver to see if he would take him as a passenger. He left his heavy bag next to the first rickshaw driver because it was too difficult to carry. While waiting, rickshaw drivers started to wonder why the man had put rotten vegetables in a brand new bag. If the vegetables were spoiled, wouldn't he usually just use a plastic bag? The rickshaw driver noticed that the bag emitted a smell similar to that of a butcher's shop where meat is prepared. The man convinced an auto rickshaw driver to take him, but the driver only agreed to the ride for 180 Indian rupees, which is about $2, because of the foul odor coming from the bag. Normally, the fare from Kalyan railway station to Bhiwandi is just 80 rupees, or about $1. The first driver nearby overheard this and was surprised that he would pay more than double the usual fare. This made the driver suspicious, so he asked the man to open the bag. Upon hearing the rickshaw driver's words, the man became nervous and didn't respond. Instead, he instructed the second auto rickshaw driver to start driving. However, the second driver also found him suspicious and refused to take him. A tense situation developed outside the railway station. The first driver then called the police. When the man saw this, he panicked, left his bag behind, and bolted toward Kalyan railway station, disappearing from sight. Meanwhile, other auto rickshaw drivers outside the station called the police to report the abandoned bag and the foul odor coming from it. After the call, police quickly arrived at the railway station. The auto rickshaw driver reported that a man had approached him with a smelly bag, but when he had asked him to open it, he had run away. Alarmed, the police instructed everyone to back off. They then opened the black bag in front of the crowd. As soon as the bag was unzipped, everyone present, both auto rickshaw drivers and police officers, was struck with fear. It was likely the first time any of them had seen such a terrifying sight. Even some of the officers were witnessing something this gruesome for the first time in their careers. Inside the bag were the severed lower half of a human body, specifically, human legs. From the start, the police identified the dismembered body as belonging to a woman based on its physical characteristics. They promptly sent the body part to a nearby hospital for an autopsy and DNA testing. However, since the body was missing its head, it was very challenging to establish what the deceased woman might have looked like or what her facial features were. The pathologists quickly informed the police that the woman's body had been dismembered with a weapon that had sharp, serrated edges. They noted scratches on her thighs and observed that the area where her torso had been separated was cut in a rough, uneven way. This led them to believe that a handsaw was likely used in the dismemberment. The police discovered from the pathologist examining the body that the girl had been murdered 2 to 3 days prior. They estimated her age to be between 20 and 25 years. At the same time, the police struggled to identify the unclaimed body. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the crime branch, also known as the Crime Investigation Department, joined the investigation. Afterward, the Koyan police stepped up their investigation and decided to interview the auto rickshaw drivers who had first noticed the bag and alerted them. When the police spoke with first driver and his fellow drivers, they learned that the person who placed the black bag near the railway station was wearing a red shirt and khaki pants, and had a white cloth wrapped around his head. Since this unidentified individual had left Koyan railway station, the police and the crime branch team quickly requested CCTV footage from all cameras at the station. The police then organized a large team to analyze all the camera footage, focusing on the time frame from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. on December 8th. After several hours of searching, some officers finally spotted the man in the red shirt on one of the station's cameras. To their surprise, he wasn't alone. Another man in a pink shirt was also seen holding the bag as they both exited the station together. However, the first driver and the other auto rickshaw drivers reported that only one person had approached them. When the officers shared the CCTV footage with the drivers, they recognized the man in the video as the one who had delivered the black bag to them. They also informed the police that when they called the police emergency number in front of that man, he became frightened and ran back inside the railway station. This led the police to review more CCTV footage. In another CCTV footage, a man wearing a red shirt was spotted running on a platform. He entered a restroom, took off his red shirt, and put on a different shirt. This change was probably made to avoid being recognized, although he kept his khaki-colored pants on. When he left the restroom, he walked casually, trying to appear nonchalant. By this point, he had likely boarded a train and escaped, which posed a new challenge for the police. They needed to identify this man and find out where he had come from. The officers speculated that he was likely local to Koyan City, as it would be unusual for someone to carry a heavy bag containing human legs over a distance of 100 to 150 miles just to dispose of it. After the suspect left Koyan railway station at around 5 a.m., the police collaborated with railway officials to determine how many trains had stopped there around that time and their origins. They discovered that 3 trains had arrived at the station within a 20-minute window, 10 minutes before and 10 minutes after 5 a.m. The police then traced these trains back to their previous stops. At that point, only half of the girl's body had been found. The police believed that if the murderer had placed her legs in a black bag, he might have dismembered the rest of her body and disposed of it in another black bag elsewhere. Consequently, they issued a public alert asking people to report any abandoned bags immediately. They also contacted their informants to check if any girls aged 20 to 25 had recently been reported missing in the nearby areas. The police continued their search for the man seen in CCTV footage from 3 different railway stations. Their efforts paid off when they spotted a man in a red shirt at Titvala railway station around 4 a.m., waiting for a train. He was carrying the same large, heavy black bag. He had received help from a man in a pink shirt at Koyan railway station. The 2 stations are about 9 miles apart, so it was clear that he couldn't have walked the entire distance with such a heavy bag. He must have used some form of public transportation. The police decided to question the auto rickshaw drivers waiting outside the station. They used screenshots from the CCTV footage to show each driver and asked if any of them had dropped a man off at the railway station with a large bag. While the man's face was unclear in the images, his clothing was distinctive. One of the auto rickshaw drivers outside Titvala railway station recognized the photo and approached the police, stating that he was the one who dropped the person off at the station in the early hours of December 8th. When the police inquired where he had picked up the man, the driver explained that there was a place in Titvala called Indira Nagar, where the man had been standing on one of the roads. He said that when the man saw his auto rickshaw, he had flagged him down and asked for a ride to the railway station. He mentioned that the man had a very large bag that he couldn't lift by himself, so he helped him load it into his rickshaw. After that, he stated that he had dropped the man off at Titvala railway station as he had requested. Upon receiving this information, the police quickly went to the spot where the driver had picked up the man. On their way to Indiranagar, they got an important call from an informant. The informant shared that the man who left the black bag at Kalyan railway station, the same person they had been tracking through CCTV footage, actually lived in a chawl in Indiranagar. This news surprised the officers because the chawl was very close to where they were. Without delay, the police team changed direction and headed toward the chawl. During the investigation, they learned that in India, a chawl is a form of low-cost housing commonly located in densely populated areas with limited living space. The police found a girl around 13 or 14 years old who was in the 6th grade. They showed her a photo of a man in a red shirt and asked her if she recognized him, suggesting that he might live around there. Although the man's face was not very clear in the photo, the girl identified him by his clothing and hairstyle, stating that the uncle looked like Arvind uncle. The police then asked her where Arvind uncle lived. After obtaining his flat number, they went to his apartment but found the door locked from the outside. The officers felt disappointed, as they had not yet located the man despite their efforts. Rather than give up, they decided to interview Arvind's neighbors. During these conversations, the police also showed some of the neighbors the CCTV footage from the railway station. From this, they learned that the man's full name was Arvind Tiwari and that he worked as a manager at a transportation company called Pawan Hans Logistics. However, after speaking with the neighbors a little longer, the police discovered that Arvind Tiwari had a daughter who lived with him, but she hadn't been seen in the past 2 to 3 days. This raised concerns for the police. Not only was Arvind missing with his house locked, but his daughter had also not been seen for days. As the pieces of the puzzle started coming together, their suspicions about Arvind deepened, and they grew increasingly worried about his daughter. Because of this, the police went to the transportation company where Arvind worked to look for him. They found Arvind Tiwari there at the time. The first question the officers asked him upon seeing him was, "Where is his daughter?" The moment he heard this, a trace of tension appeared on his face, and the police immediately sensed that Arvind was hiding many secrets. Sensing this, the officers took Arvind to the police station for questioning, away from the rest of the company's employees. Even there, the police repeated their question about his daughter. However, at first, he continued lying, saying, his daughter has gone to the village to meet her mom and sisters. After hearing this, the police realized that Arvind himself would not tell the truth. Because of this, they showed him the CCTV footage in which he was captured. When the police asked him about the black bag, he broke down and then confessed his crime, admitting that he himself killed his daughter. The legs recovered from the bag belonged to his 22-year-old daughter, Princy Tiwari. After this, Arvind voluntarily recounted the entire story behind why he killed his daughter. Arvind Tiwari, 47 years old, was originally from Jaunpur, Uttar Pradesh, a city about 915 km away from Kalyan. Besides him, his wife and 4 daughters also lived in Jaunpur, with Princy being the eldest among them. In early 2016, Arvind moved from Jaunpur to Malad in search of work. During this time, in June 2019, his eldest daughter Princy completed her graduation and moved in with her father to pursue a better future. Princy decided that she wanted to get a job to financially support her father and the rest of the family. Within a few days of arriving, she began looking for a job at a local company. Soon, she found success and secured a small position at a private firm not far from home. However, about 2 to 3 months later, in October or November 2019, Princy informed her father that she was in love with a boy and wanted to marry him. However, Arvind Tiwari was an old-fashioned man, one could call him a conservative father. When he found out that the boy his daughter wanted to marry was from a different caste, he outright refused the marriage. On the other hand, Princy was adamant that she would only marry him. Arvind was unwilling to accept this marriage because he believed that if he married his daughter into another caste, people in society would say a lot of things against him. Besides, he still had to arrange the marriages of his 3 other daughters, and if Princy married outside their caste, it would create difficulties for 3 other daughters' marriages as well. With Princey insisting on marrying the same guy and her father Arvind equally adamant about stopping the marriage, arguments between father and daughter began to occur from time to time. On the evening of December 6, 2019, after both Arvind and Princey returned home from their respective work, another argument broke out. However, this time the argument escalated to the point where, in anger, Princey consumed rat poison, causing her to lose consciousness. At this point, it is unclear whether Princey consumed the rat poison herself or if Arvind, exerting control over her, deliberately made her drink it. In fact, the police believe that Arvind had mixed the poison into his daughter's food, and as soon as Princey ate it, she lost consciousness. Arvind Tiwari insisted to the police that Princey had taken the poison by herself. However, this raised an important question: if Arvind was honest, why didn't he take her to a hospital or doctor right away? The facts show that Princey was left unconscious in their home throughout the night, and instead of seeking help, Arvind chose to go to sleep. When he woke up on the morning of December 7th, he found that Princey had stopped breathing and had died from the poisoning. Seeing this, Arvind became extremely anxious and decided to dismantle his daughter's body to hide it in faraway places or rivers. He thought that if he did this, the police would never find Princey's body, and he wouldn't be caught. That morning, Arvind went to the market and bought 2 large bags and a handsaw. He returned home and, in his small room, cut his daughter's body into 3 parts. He removed her head from her torso and then separated the torso from the legs. He placed the legs in one bag, the torso along with both hands in another bag. This horrifying task took him all day. When night arrived, he took the bag containing his daughter's torso out of his room. He used public transportation and convinced an auto rickshaw driver to take him to his desired location by claiming he was carrying rotten vegetables. On the way, he discarded the bag into a river in Titvala. The next morning, December 8th, Arvind left again, this time with a bag containing the lower half of his daughter's body. He first arrived at Titvala railway station and then took a train to Kalyan railway station. After getting off the train with the heavy bag, a passerby noticed Arvind struggling and offered to help. The man, wearing a pink shirt, assisted Arvind in lifting the bag and carried it outside the railway station before departing. Later, police confirmed that the passerby seen in the CCTV footage was not the murderer. He had simply helped Arvind with his luggage. The police tracked him down to his home, where he reiterated that he had no knowledge of the contents of the bag and only provided assistance. Following this, the police took Arvind with them as they searched for Princey's upper body and head. Arvind admitted that he had thrown the bag containing Princey's torso into the Ulhas River, leading the police to follow the river in hopes of finding it. On December 11th, they located the bag in the Ulhas River. Subsequently, the police turned their attention to finding Princey's head. Arvind guided them to the place where he had disposed of it. Despite searching for several days, they could not find the head. However, they did recover the handsaw used in the murder from the area Arvind had pointed out. While her head remained missing, forensic scientists were able to verify through DNA testing that the body was indeed that of Princey Tiwari. A father had brutally killed his own daughter simply because she had fallen in love with a boy from another caste and wanted to marry him. Now, Arvind Tiwari is in police custody. By committing this murder, he has not only ruined his own life but also the lives of his 4 daughters and his wife. In the end, this man will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The murder of Princey Tiwari by her father, Arvind Tiwari, in Titvala, India, revealed the devastating toll of caste-based prejudices. Arvind's refusal to accept Princey's inter-caste marriage led to her poisoning and the gruesome disposal of her remains in the Ulhas River. Arrested and charged under Section 302 of the Indian Penal Code, Arvind faces life imprisonment, likely with additional penalties for tampering with evidence. While justice awaits final sentencing, the tragedy has shattered Princey's family and sparked calls for reform, urging India to confront rigid traditions that fuel such irreversible losses. Today, we will talk about a crime that became famous in the state of Tennessee, USA. Its victim became a household name, and an urban legend was formed about her. For many years, this story has been used to warn children. However, in reality, this story is full of lies and raises many questions. In February 1964, Paula Herring was 18 years old. The girl was a good student who had just entered the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Life seemed to be just beginning for her. Paula had been very athletic and had played basketball for many years. This not only made her strong physically but also mentally. These qualities helped her withstand the strong blows of fate. She had lost her father 3 years earlier. Paula had always been a daddy's girl, so her father's death was shocking. Her mother, Eva Herring, a widow, immersed herself in her work as a nurse and willingly formed numerous acquaintances with men. It seemed that she was not particularly affected by her husband's death. Paula sought solace in her loved ones, growing closer to her 6-year-old brother, Alan. The child did not understand what was happening and needed care. They often spent little time at home while their mother worked and went on regular dates. Their relationship was strained, and Paula planned to leave home as soon as an opportunity arose. The campus of the University of Tennessee turned out to be the best option to create distance. Paula and her mother communicated little, but Eva frequently asked for her daughter's help to watch Alan while she went out on dates. On Saturday, February 22, 1964, Eva left home with 2 men at around 7 p.m. and again asked Paula to babysit her younger brother. All of this happened despite Paula's plans to meet friends and go to a basketball game. She was forced to stay with her brother. She intended to put him to bed and read a book she had borrowed from a friend. At around 11 p.m., Eva returned home with 2 men. Eva immediately noticed that the front door was unlocked and felt anxious. Upon entering, they found Paula lying face down in a pool of her own blood. Her white shirt was stained with blood, and she showed no signs of life. It was clear that she had been brutally beaten and strangled. The probable cause of death was shots fired in her back, hitting her directly in the heart. The skirt of Paula was pulled up, suggesting abuse. While one of 2 friends rushed to call emergency services, Eva checked her daughter's pulse and, feeling faint from the sight, ran outside to catch her breath. Meanwhile, the men did not return to the house, opting instead to flee the crime scene. Eva realized that it was too late to help her daughter, but quickly regained her composure when she remembered that her son Alan was not with her. Fortunately, the boy was found in the next room, merely sleeping. When he heard the adults screaming, he came out to investigate. He explained that he and his sister had been watching TV that evening, then he went to bed early. Before that, he noticed his sister received a phone call while sitting in the living room. The next morning, news of the crime spread rapidly and appeared on the front pages of newspapers. The community was shocked, especially given the context of the corruption in America at that time. Her death was linked to a series of abuses of vagrancy recorded in the area in the previous months. However, the local residents believed that the crimes were committed at a much higher level. They were convinced that someone from a criminal contingent was taking advantage of the authorities' powerlessness, leading to increased murders. Consequently, citizens pressured law enforcement agencies to act. By Sunday morning, news of Paula's murder had made headlines. On Monday, a witness arrived at the station to report that a man named John Clark had bragged at a bar on the night of the murder that he intended to go to Eva's house, asserting that he would confront Eva if she answered his call. He planned to bring 6 cans of beer and stated he would wait for Eva if Paula did not join him. Thus, the police had a prime suspect. John Clark, nicknamed Red because of the color of his hair, was the son of a judge who was also the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. John was considered the black sheep of the family. His other siblings had achieved great success in life. Some worked for the CIA, some had built careers in the army, and others were involved in real estate. In contrast, John had been unemployed for the past year and a half. Many considered him a drunk and a loser. That same week, on Thursday, the mayor appeared on television during an official press conference, stating that the police were tracking the main suspect in the murder. However, he had not yet been arrested because there was no irrefutable evidence against him. Within an hour, the situation changed. After a meeting involving the prosecutor's office, detectives, and municipal representatives, suspicions were confirmed. By Friday morning, it was decided that there was enough evidence against the main suspect, and a warrant was issued for the arrest of John for first-degree murder and also for abuse. Following the trial, John Clark was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. It may seem that the investigation proceeded too quickly, and indeed, this was the case. The incident involving Paula had become highly publicized, and authorities wanted to resolve it as swiftly as possible. After several decades, the armed forces finally began to ask key questions regarding a case that had seemingly been ignored at the time of the crime. However, it took more than 50 years to get closer to a solution. An impromptu investigation led a man named Michael Bishop to write a book about Paula's death, highlighting the story of how John Clark may have been framed. Bishop became interested in historical crimes committed in Nashville, an area so corrupt that there was more than enough material for investigation. Together with a friend, he started a project to catalog these interesting cases. He obtained a box of documents dated from the 1960s, which contained several folders labeled Paula Herring. He was amazed to find photographs from the sensational case that the police had conducted in those distant years, including crime scene photos and forensic reports from the morgue. The information indicated that Paula was the victim of a brutal murder, suffering from 3 gunshot wounds and 4 blunt force traumas to the head. She had been subjected to prolonged beating, numerous defensive abrasions and bruises were found. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation on her neck. However, court documents only recorded 2 gunshot wounds. In this box, there was a note from Mr. Beverly Briley, who was actively involved in the case for reasons that appeared to stem from compassion, though the truth proved to be much more trivial. The processes and methods that the mayor used raised serious questions. Everything looked as if the interests of influential people were involved in this case. Michael began to delve into the circumstances of this tangled case. The closer he got to it, the more it resembled a web of lies. As it turned out, the then Mayor Beverly Briley was not just passively involved in the investigation of this crime, he played a significant role. It took time to understand his involvement. From the very beginning, he built his career on deception, starting with lies about his educational background, extending to his marital status and the existence of adult children, which he misrepresented to the Supreme Court. In truth, he was a notorious womanizer. Furthermore, rumors surrounded him regarding illegal substance use. These rumors arose because he periodically went to the hospital secretly, likely to deal with the effects of his systematic banned substance use without attracting media attention. While in a private clinic, he met 3 nurses. Gradually, these 3 women found themselves in an exclusive group they called the Drinking Club, which also included at least 2 detectives, the mayor, an assistant district attorney, and a sheriff. The exact number of members in this organization remained unknown, but it was clear that there were many more participants. They regularly met and used illegal substances. This is why Paula's mother and her friends became members of this organization. The nurses could obtain prescription drugs. However, there was immediate suspicion that this entire group might have been connected to the crime. Even Eva's interrogations raised questions. She doesn't give any direct answers. And one important point is that Paula was found after reading a book. Strangely enough, the book disappeared. But why would anyone take the book? Even more questions arose when Michael tried to understand why Paula had ended up in the house in Nashville that weekend. She was studying in college and lived on campus. In fact, she had an invitation from her boyfriend to go skiing, and her new friends from the sorority had invited her to a basketball game, where she was supposed to play the role of the team captain. It was strange that she chose to visit her mother, who essentially did not care about her. Even the request to babysit her brother, Alan, seemed odd. as the neighbors knew perfectly well that Eva was not particularly worried about him. She never used the services of a nanny. Most often, she simply left her son unattended for many hours, probably heading to her privileged club. Several witnesses described in detail the relationship between mother and daughter. All of them knew that it was strained. Eva's interrogations lasted about 6 hours, during which she provided very contradictory information. She left the police office on Saturday morning. By Monday, a witness came to the station and told the detectives about John Clark, the same person who allegedly went to Eva's house with beer and was supposed to have been the last to see Paula alive. In fact, the story of this witness was questionable. He was a guy from a wealthy family, unemployed, spent most of his time in pool clubs and bars. He had a dubious reputation as a habitual liar with addictions. Despite the doubts surrounding his story, he confirmed that John Clark owned a .32 caliber pistol, which matched the murder weapon. By around 6 p.m. on Monday, detectives arrived at John's location. He agreed to come in for questioning and even asked who could take him back home. Obviously, he did not consider the possibility of arrest. John had a reputation for drinking, but like many others involved in this story, he had good connections thanks to his father. John didn't really work anywhere. His family was supported by his wife, who worked as a school teacher. John was interrogated all night, and there were more than a few interrogators present. When asked to provide samples from under his fingernails to test for gunpowder, he refused, as he did with the polygraph test. He only agreed to a full-body search. Not a single scratch or bruise was found on him. In 1966, no DNA tests existed, making it impossible to identify the skin particles found under the victim's fingernails. John confirmed that he owned a .32 caliber pistol, but it had been either stolen or lost 10 days before he visited the police station. He claimed he didn't go to Eva's house that evening. Instead, he went to several bars from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., then returned home around 9:30 p.m. His wife confirmed he was home at that time. The police drove from the suspect's house to the crime scene, with travel time estimated between 14 and 24 minutes, depending on the route. According to the official conclusion, Paula was killed between 10 p.m. and 10:30 p.m., meaning John could have committed the crime. However, it was impossible to obtain a confession from the suspect, and there was no physical evidence linking John to the crime. The witness's story began to fall apart. The next morning, the witness received a call informing him that his story was not corroborated and that he would not receive a reward. He then presented new details to confirm his claims. He talked about a party where John's friends had challenged him to prove he had the guts to use a gun. John, a tipsy man, pulled out a gun and shot into the ground in front of the house. The witness provided an exact location, and they were able to recover the bullet. By coincidence, a book was also found in a ditch that Paula was supposed to have been reading on the night of the murder. It was strange that before this, dozens of law enforcement officers had failed to find it even on John's property. John admitted that the same morning he took his dark suit to the dry cleaners. When examined, experts found wool fibers identical to those on the floor where Paula was murdered. However, there was no blood on the clothes. An expert who later testified at the trial argued that it would take more than mere contact to transfer these fibers from the victim's clothes to John's suit. There had to be close, prolonged contact. Just a few hours after the bullet was sent for ballistics analysis, results confirmed it matched the bullets found at the crime scene. Yet, the law enforcement response was not straightforward. Originally, the bullet had not been found, but it was located the following morning in plain sight, raising suspicions that it had been planted. Neighbors recalled hearing a car quickly drive away from the crime scene, making a clanking sound. The book found in the ditch had no fingerprints at all, and even Michael herself expressed surprise at the speed of the tests, which took just a few hours along with the shipping of items. Such speed was simply stunning for the 1960s. At the pre-trial hearing, John's lawyer managed to get the abuse charge dropped because the medical examiner's report refuted it. They also succeeded in changing the venue, moving the trial to Jackson, Tennessee. The trial was scheduled for September, but before that period arrived, many events transpired, particularly involving several high-ranking police officers implicated in bribery, illegal activities related to selling in banned strip clubs and gambling halls. This likely reached even higher echelons of power, as the district attorney eventually refused to participate in some cases, including Paula's. These were handed over to his assistants, who were discovered to be members of the mayor's exclusive club. Both insisted on the death penalty for the defendant, but this was eventually cancelled. John was facing only life imprisonment. The judge decided that the trial would take 5 days. This decision seems strange given that the whole case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. Not only were fingerprints missing, but even the murder weapon was absent. Some of the material evidence used by the prosecution seemed to have no relation to what happened during the case. The jury was isolated to prevent them from accessing information about the case from the outside. In fact, the judge, prosecutor, and lawyers seemed to be on the same team from the very beginning, so even the most absurd decisions met with no resistance. Naturally, under these circumstances, John had no chance. It was later discovered that the prosecutor was Eva Herring's former lover, and it turned out that her lawyer was also her lover. Interestingly, when John was summoned, he admitted that he had slept with Eva days before the murder of her daughter. John clearly remembered coming to his mistress's house with a gun. But he later forgot about the gun because he had been drinking that evening and simply forgot what happened. One day, Eva's husband was found dead. Curiously, shortly before these events, a life insurance policy had been issued. After receiving money for it, Eva bought a house where, 3 years later, her own daughter died. Since John was also her lover, it was obvious that she had dirt on him. The most controversial point was the number of gunshot wounds. Paula was actually wounded 3 times, 2 bullets that were discussed passed through her. One of them were found under her body on the floor, while the third wound may not have been mentioned because it did not penetrate, and the bullet remained in her body. It was revealed that Paula's autopsy was not performed. In fact, the forensic experts stated that it was unnecessary since it was obvious she died from a couple of gunshot wounds that pierced her heart. However, it seemed that the autopsy was never conducted because the bullet found in her body could point to the real culprit of the crime and justify John. Strangely, Eva discovers her husband has died in similarly unclear circumstances, and his death is ruled to end one's own life due to a prescription drug overdose. Now it looked even more suspicious. Weren't there too many coincidences that one woman had 2 people die in her family under strange circumstances? According to Eva's confession, her husband left a suicide note, but for some reason, it was not mentioned anywhere. Eva claimed that she lost it. She stated that her husband had become depressed due to losing his job. She also suggested that the nurse had simpler access to prescription drugs than her husband. Which means Eva could have poisoned him, involving the highest echelons of power. Members of Eva's drinking club gathered, and naturally, this information did not appear at the trial. According to everyone more acquainted with the circumstances of the crime, Eva and her accomplices should have been in the dock in John's place, both for the murder of her daughter and for her husband's voluntary departure from life. After 5 days, as decided in advance, the hearings ended, and the jury went to deliberate the verdict. As expected, they found John Clark guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. At that moment, the defendant lost consciousness and came to a few moments later, asking what had happened. Several appeals followed, and after the next one was filed, the same lawyer represented John. Despite his dissolute lifestyle and drunkenness, John himself seemed to be the most decent person among all the defendants in the case. Probably out of guilt, his lawyer became the only person from the entire group who was tormented by his conscience. Thanks to good renovation, John served only 9 years out of the required 30. His sentence was given in 1975, and he was released on parole. Later, he died insisting on his innocence. In January 1979, a series of pardons was initiated by the new mayor. He released 52 civil servants who had been jailed after numerous high-profile trials, including 20 convicted of murder. Subsequently, all these individuals became members of various political parties, and some even became FBI agents. During this period, the mayor himself was under investigation, particularly after an incident in 1977 when he fired a female chair of the council for refusing to release prisoners suspected of bribing officials. It was later revealed that the woman had been correct in her suspicions, but no action was taken against the mayor. He was eventually convicted of fraud, extortion for the purpose of selling liquor licenses, which led to a series of charges and scandalous convictions affecting police officers and high-ranking officials in Nashville. Among those implicated were exclusively addicts, corrupt officials, and criminals. A private club was uncovered, where nurses were found to have stolen prescription drugs from the hospital. Eva was fired from a private clinic due to her addiction to substances. The circumstances surrounding her daughter's death remain a mystery, as well as the voluntary departure of her husband from her life, are unknown. The participants and organizers took their secrets to the grave. More than half a century later, this history has been carefully concealed, and in Michael's book, most of the people who reported valuable information are listed as anonymous. They were still wary of the powerful individuals at the time of its writing, as many officials believed to be connected to this crime were still alive. Among Michael's informants were witnesses who provided detailed accounts of Eva. The informant said that Eva was raised in a Texas brothel, learned early on to use body as a means to influence people and obtain what she needed, including money, power. Notably, a few days before Paula's murder, Eva acquired 2 burial plots. According to the official conclusion, Paula was killed between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m., while her mother and her companions found her at 11 p.m. Her mother could not have known about her daughter's death at the time of purchasing the plots, leading to questions about whether it was mere coincidence. As far as is known, Paula was studying to be a lawyer. Due to a strained relationship with her mother, likely decided to expose her criminal activity. Paul suspected Eva might be involved in her father's death and collected incriminating evidence against her. Paul was aware of many unsavory details regarding influential people that could jeopardize her life. However, this is only one of the possible assumptions. The author of the book, Michael Bishop, himself is not entirely convinced of John Clark's innocence, as some evidence still points to him. After the investigation concluded, Eva returned to Texas with her son. Eva died in Texas at the age of 52, and her death certificate indicated a heart attack. However, those who knew her believed that her demise was related to alcoholism and substance abuse. 5 years later, the mayor of Briley died, and Eva's son Alan outlived them all. Alan often wondered why his father's suicide note was never found, what happened to his sister. Paula still lies in a lonely grave, with an empty plot of land beside her. Some believe that the second plot next to Paula was meant to be the final resting place for Alan, but something went wrong that night, and he survived. This case generated a lot of publicity, leading Eva Herring to involve her powerful lovers in the investigation, including the mayor, who found a convenient suspect in John Clark. However, this is merely a theory that can never be confirmed or refuted. The Paula Herring case remains one of Tennessee's most haunting mysteries, its legacy etched in an urban legend urging children to lock their doors. While John Clark's conviction appeared to close the chapter, Michael Bishop's investigation decades later exposed troubling gaps in the evidence, suggesting a rush to judgment possibly tainted by corruption. The truth about Paula's death, Eva's role, and the shadowy figures allegedly involved may never fully emerge, leaving only questions and a lingering sense of justice unserved. Paula's story endures as a cautionary tale, not just of crime, but of how lies and power can obscure the pursuit of truth. David Brown was born in 1952 in Phoenix, Arizona, as the sixth of 8 children. His father, Arthur, worked as a mechanic and took on extra shifts to support the large family. His mother, Manuela, was a housewife who managed the household tasks and took care of the children. David later described her as selfish, strict, and domineering, often showing cruelty towards him, his siblings, and her husband. Manuela's strong personality frequently overshadowed her quiet and calm husband, Arthur, who struggled to assert himself. David had a strained relationship with his mother, Manuela. As he grew up, he sought revenge on her by mocking her Latin American background and expressing contempt for her culture. He refused to accept her customs and frequently criticized her. Despite being bright and intelligent, David struggled in school due to various illnesses and eventually became a hypochondriac, believing he had cancer since his teenage years. He held very high expectations of others, yet his close friends noted that he had low self-esteem. David enjoyed the company of people with serious health issues, as it made him feel better about himself. After dropping out of school in the 8th grade, he started working to support himself and showed little interest in family connections, only reaching out to his siblings when he needed something. His primary interests became women and money. The first girl David dated long-term was Brenda Sands. They met when they were 15 and began living together. Brenda also had family problems and frequently ran away from her parents, which brought her and David very close. When they were 16, they decided to run away together. They worked odd jobs and lived in poverty. Brenda held various part-time jobs and became the breadwinner, while David sold goods, often fell ill, and was on a variety of medications, including prescription drugs. He believed he had a range of illnesses, from allergies and bronchitis to cancer. At 17, Brenda became pregnant. Despite their young age, they loved each other and wished to get married, but they needed their parents' permission. On July 3, 1970, they got married, and just a few months later, their daughter Cinnamon was born. Their family then moved to Long Beach, California, where David took a special interest in their child, Cinnamon. Eventually, they sought state assistance since they couldn't support themselves or their child. Through a state program, David became eligible for free education, which he decided to pursue. In 1971, he enrolled in university to study statistical data processing with a focus on computer work. He quickly developed a strong interest in the subject and excelled in his studies, becoming a skilled professional. This new path allowed him not only to support his family but also to begin building a successful career. Cinnamon was very close to her father, David, who spoiled and adored her. Meanwhile, Brenda was suffering in her relationship, as David was a controlling and abusive partner. He restricted Brenda's freedom, not allowing her to drive or be away from him for long, except when she went to work to earn money. Brenda described David as having an obsession with other women. His pattern was always the same: he would initially fall in love, become possessive, exert control, and then ultimately abandon the woman for someone younger. After tiring of Brenda, David considered divorce and started a relationship with Laura, who was 3 years younger. One day, he came home and announced his desire for a divorce, handing Brenda the papers to sign. He intended to seek full custody of Cinnamon. Brenda refused to sign, believing that David's new relationship would soon fizzle out and that he would return to the family. However, David's anger over her refusal made him even more abusive and controlling. He physically attacked her multiple times, even strangling her while she slept. This violence prompted Brenda to leave with their daughter. In a desperate act, David confronted her at work, holding a weapon to his head and threatening to end his life. Despite this, Brenda remained resolute. After the divorce, Brenda was granted custody of their children, partly due to David's inappropriate behavior. This situation left David in a deep depression, and he even contemplated ending his life, but he eventually started to recover. David married Laura when she was just 19 and he was 23. Their marriage lasted about 4 years before issues arose again. Frustrated, David sought a new hobby and decided to get a divorce, after which he met Linda Bailey and her family. The Bailey sisters, PM and Linda, had a challenging upbringing. Their mother struggled with alcoholism and had 11 children, 7 of whom were still teenagers or younger. They lived in difficult financial circumstances and couldn't even afford outings like a trip to McDonald's. After meeting Linda's family, David decided to help them. He offered to pay them to clean his house, claiming he had cancer and could no longer handle household chores on his own. He made this proposal to PM and her younger sister Linda, who were eager to earn some extra money. During this time, David formed a secret relationship with PM. As a skilled manipulator, he targeted vulnerable individuals and portrayed himself as their hero. This behavior was consistent. He would also test the loyalty of those who were close to him, including his daughter, Cinnamon. She stole things from other cars at night to win her father's love. She had no idea that her father would eventually test her loyalty in a much crueler way. David's relationship with PM lasted 2 years before it ended. He then began openly dating her younger sister, Linda, who was only 15 at the time. Despite their significant age difference, their relationship progressed. By the time she turned 17, she had convinced her mother to allow them to marry. They wed in Las Vegas in 1979 when David was 27. So strange, just a month after their marriage, he kicked her out, claiming she was too immature. During this time, David switched jobs and started earning significantly more money. He spent this money on women, especially the daughters of the Bailey family, who were easily impressed by even small gifts. Later, David decided to change careers again and launched his own company specializing in data recovery from damaged computers. He developed a unique method that he kept secret, which proved to be very effective. His business flourished, and his techniques were even used for data recovery after serious incidents, such as fires or natural disasters, involving large corporations. During this period, David divorced Linda, began a new relationship, and remarried quickly. However, his new wife had 2 children, leading to another divorce. Meanwhile, he rekindled his relationship with Linda. Interestingly, before marrying Linda for the first time, he told her family that he had overcome cancer, which earned him their support. In 1981, he rented a larger house, remarried Linda, and moved there with her and her younger sister, Patty, who was 5 years younger. It's important to note that Patty had always looked up to David, who seemed kind and generous, often fulfilling her small wishes. Although they met when she was just 8 years old, Patty felt jealous of her sisters in relation to David. Now, at 15, she was developing feelings for him, and David began to notice her affection, taking advantage of the situation by frequently looking into her bedroom and suggesting that her feelings were normal. Throughout her childhood, Patty was abused by her brother, while her mother, who struggled with alcoholism, remained indifferent to the situation. When Patty moved into David's house, she experienced having her own room and a closet full of clothes for the first time, without needing to share. Meanwhile, Cinnamon's relationship with her father, David, is maintained, although she does not visit him as often as she would like. She lived with her mother, Brenda, and had a good relationship with her young stepmother, Linda, who was only 21 at the time. During this period, David began to show increasing dissatisfaction with his marriage to Linda. Despite having a daughter named Crystal, who was born in 1983, he began to turn Patty against her sister, Linda. He claimed that Linda wanted to take his business from him. Within a few months, he convinced Patty that Linda had malicious intentions, to the point that she was genuinely afraid David might be harmed so that Linda could take control of the business. Meanwhile, Cinnamon's relationship with her mother, Brenda, deteriorated, leading to conflicts as she wanted to spend more time with her father, David. By the end of summer in 1984, she decided to move in with David and enroll in a local school. From the very beginning, David expressed his concerns about Linda's supposed evil intentions, successfully convincing both Patty and Cinnamon of this narrative. He even suggested that they needed to escape the city to avoid being harmed. Everyone saw him as a hero, which made them fearful of the situation. Following this, he began discussing with them how to eliminate Linda. Curiously, divorce was never considered, and they openly talked about the idea of killing her. The group brainstormed options and concluded that using a weapon was the best method. By the end of 1984, they made their first attempt. David gives Patty a weapon and instructs Patty to kill Linda while she sleeps, but Patty cannot bring herself to do it. David had taken out multiple life insurance policies on Linda, totaling around $800,000, which would be equivalent to approximately $2.5 million today. When David realized that Patty wouldn't be able to complete the job, he decided to manipulate his daughter, Cinnamon, coercing her into action. He told her that if Linda didn't die, he would have to run away and hide for the rest of his life, which meant Cinnamon would never see him again. A couple of days later, Cinnamon stood over Linda, holding a weapon. She placed a pillow on Linda's head to muffle the sound and then pulled the trigger. The gun got stuck in the fabric after the shot. Afraid, Cinnamon threw the weapon down and returned to the room where she was staying with baby Crystal. They went back to the bedroom and found Linda wounded and crying on the bed, asking for help and not understanding who had harmed her. Cinnamon had narrowly missed her target. The weapon was left on the bed, stuck in the torn fabric of the pillow. Patty took the weapon and returned it to Cinnamon, encouraging her to complete what she had begun. Another shot echoed through the room. Around 3:30 a.m., the police station received an emergency call from a distressed man named David. He was crying and urgently requested help for his wife. When the police arrived, he immediately expressed his belief that his wife was attacked. He claimed that he had left the house to go to the store, and during his absence, a tragic event unfolded. Surprisingly, he accused his daughter of the act. David's wife, Linda, was found alive but had sustained 2 attack wounds to the head. She died shortly after in front of the police, and the medical examiner concluded that she could not have been saved. David was very emotional, crying profusely and appearing more unwell than usual. Detectives were concerned that he might need medical attention. Meanwhile, his 14-year-old daughter, Cinnamon, was missing until the next morning. The same officer returned to the house to search for her more carefully and discovered her lying in the doghouse. Cinnamon was curled up in a fetal position, trembling. She seemed to be in distress and had difficulty getting out of the doghouse. She was covered in bloody vomit and held a note in her hand, asking for forgiveness for what she had done. When she was taken to the police station for questioning, it was clear she was suffering significantly from stress, prompting them to send her to the hospital, where she lost consciousness. The cause of her deteriorating state was unclear, so a toxicology test was conducted. It revealed the presence of opioid painkillers. According to the doctor, the bloody vomiting was a lifesaver, as it led to the expulsion of most of the pills from her system. Cinnamon was saved, and after she regained consciousness, she was taken back to the police station, where she confessed to the murder. Authorities determined she would be tried as a juvenile delinquent since she was under the age of 16. Cinnamon initially confessed to the crime, explaining that she often argued with Linda and had found a weapon in David's office, which she had used. In August 1985, her trial began in California for minors. Seeking the best defense, David hired a skilled lawyer for Cinnamon. However, her testimony changed. She no longer admitted guilt and instead claimed insanity. The defense aimed to prove she was mentally incompetent at the time of the crime, presenting photographs of her discovery as evidence. Cinnamon's disbelief that Linda had died supported this defense. She outright denied the fact. Although she had no diagnosis of a mental illness, her lawyer suggested that the use of banned substances had impaired her perception, hoping to lessen her sentence. When questioned, David spoke at length about his health issues and how his family, including his mother and wives, had negatively impacted his life, which reflects his self-centered nature. In contrast, his former wives portrayed him as manipulative and domineering. Some even believed he may have conspired against Linda, but there was no evidence to support these claims. He promised Cinnamon that she would only undergo short treatment in a clinic after the incident and would be released, but he was mistaken. On September 13, 1985, Cinnamon was sentenced to 27 years in prison, having faced the possibility of life imprisonment, but her lawyer secured a reduced sentence. David did not attend the courtroom when the verdict was announced, fearing it might harm his health. His wife, Linda, passed away at the age of 23 and was cremated. Shortly before her murder, David had taken out life insurance policies on her, which paid out around $835,000. 6 months later, he purchased a luxurious mansion for $330,000, moved in his parents, bought several expensive cars, and lived a life of luxury. His mistress, Patty, and his baby, Crystal, also lived with him. David's mother, Manuela, was puzzled for a long time about why Patty continued to live with him after everything that had happened. Her son either ignored her concerns or told her not to interfere. Finally, Manuela realized that David's concern for Patty was more serious than just helping to take care of her, especially as they began sharing a bedroom. Rumors of their inappropriate relationship circulated throughout the city. From the start, the investigator assigned to Cinnamon's case had doubts about David's behavior. He was disturbed by David's actions, which did not reflect those of a grieving husband or a father mourning the loss of his daughter. Even during court proceedings, David sat behind his first wife, Brenda, who was worried about their daughter and behaved disruptively, pulling her hair and drawing attention to himself, irritating others. David's actions raised suspicions, especially after he received insurance money for Linda and started buying expensive items. It seemed like his love for Cinnamon had vanished. His daughter was unaware of his luxurious lifestyle and didn't know where he was. Unlike Brenda, who consistently attended all the hearings, David only visited Cinnamon in prison occasionally. He discouraged her from participating in any rehabilitation programs that could have shortened her sentence. David assured Cinnamon that her youth would protect her from facing prison time, downplaying any fears she might have had. However, he was worried that the police would discover his role in the crime. In 1986, a detective uncovered that David and Patty had secretly married in Las Vegas, a fact David kept hidden from his parents. Patty became pregnant, and in September of that year, their daughter Heather was born. David refused to be listed as the father on the birth certificate and instead made up a story about a brief affair with a man who disappeared. David portrayed himself as a caring individual who decided to raise the child at home after the incident. More than 3 years later, Cinnamon found out about the insurance money her father received and the house he bought. She felt outraged that Patty, who was part of the conspiracy, continued to live in comfort while she was in prison, which she saw as unfair. The detective chose to speak with Cinnamon, who eventually revealed the conspiracy her father had planned. To confirm her claims, something concrete was necessary. Although she was scared, she agreed to use a wiretap. During a meeting on August 13, 1988, David showed up, and the goal was to steer the conversation toward her involvement in the crime. From the beginning, he kept insisting that Linda and her brother were plotting to kill him and that he had no other option. Cinnamon recounted some troubling incidents, such as the pills her father, David, had given her the night before the murder, which he said were meant to make her forget the attack. Her father then promised to hire the best lawyer to get her out of jail. David was willing to sacrifice another innocent person to save himself and promised to bring someone to the next meeting. Detectives prepared for this event, and Cinnamon wore a wiretap again. They provided her with specific instructions on what to say and ask. At first, David and Patty attempted to convince her that she had no memory of that night, but as the discussion progressed, several incriminating details surfaced, indicating that all three were involved in Linda's murder. 3 weeks later, the police arrived at David's house and arrested him and his new wife, Patty. From the outset, David denied everything and tried to blame Patty. When shown the recordings of his conversation with Cinnamon, he repeatedly changed his story, ultimately claiming that the discussion about Linda's murder was just a joke and that he was shocked that Cinnamon and Patty had planned it. He denied having done anything wrong. In September 1988, David was charged with murder. Cinnamon testified against him, revealing that he had woken her in the middle of the night and forced her to attack Linda. Prior to this, he had made her take pills and write a fake suicide note to make it seem like she had ended her life, convincing her that it would lessen her punishment. She narrowly escaped death from an overdose after vomiting. After the incident, David left the house and went to a nearby store, ensuring that the clerk saw him to create an alibi. He later explained to the police that he left because of ongoing arguments between Linda and Cinnamon. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found David guilty. He faced the death penalty but was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Patty, who was only 17 at the time of the murder, was also charged. She cooperated with the police, agreed to testify against David, and pleaded guilty to complicity. She claimed that David had tricked her into participating in Linda's murder by asserting it was essential for their happiness. She received a 3-year prison sentence. Even while awaiting trial, David continued his manipulative behavior. He approached another prisoner and offered $500,000 to kill the prosecutor and investigators on his case. However, the prisoner reported this to the police after being released. His cellmate agreed to help detectives by pretending to work with David to gather more evidence against him. Interestingly, David attempted to use his brother, Tom Brown, as a go-between for making the payment, with malicious intentions. When Tom learned of David's plans, he sadly declared that he no longer considered David a brother. For attempting to arrange these murders, David received an additional 6-year prison sentence. Cinnamon, who survived her father's betrayal, received a higher education while in prison and worked throughout her time behind bars. Her sentence was revised, and after serving 8 years with exemplary behavior, she was released in 1992 at the age of 21. In 1994, she got married, and a year later, her probation ended. She avoided communication and interviews about the incident but expressed deep regret for having allowed herself to be deceived and for becoming part of a conspiracy with fatal consequences. For some time, Cinnamon and Patty lived side by side and even communicated. David wrote to both, claiming he loved them, but no one believed him, and he never received a response. Later, Patty fought for custody of her daughter and won. She also started a family and, after 1994, tried to restore her relationship with Cinnamon, but Cinnamon refused. To manage his business, David hired a team of specialists, and it worked, as he profited from the company's activities during this time. In 2014, 61-year-old David Brown died in prison of natural causes. Jose Breton was born in Córdoba in 1973. October 8, 2011, he placed a frantic call to emergency services, reporting that his 2 young children had vanished while playing in a nearby park. The call mobilized a large number of police, relatives, and neighbors, hoping the children would return safely. But behind that urgent plea lay a sinister truth that would soon grip the nation with horror. Jose came from a stable, middle-class household, shaped by a conservative upbringing and a rigid religious framework. After completing his formal education, he chose a military path, eventually attaining the rank of infantry corporal. His service took him to war-torn Bosnia, where he operated as an ambulance driver. The brutal realities of that conflict left deep psychological scars, culminating in his desertion and return to civilian life. It was during this chapter that he encountered Ruth Ortiz, an aspiring veterinary student. Their relationship developed rapidly, and by 2002, after 4 years together, they were married. However, the marriage was troubled from the outset. Jose had openly expressed his aversion to fatherhood, warning that should they have children, Ruth would shoulder the full burden. Despite his resistance, Ruth eventually gave birth to 2 children, a daughter, also named Ruth, and later, a son, Jose. While he appeared to tolerate their daughter, the arrival of their son seemed to trigger a descent into emotional volatility. His control over Ruth intensified, and his behavior grew increasingly oppressive. Gradually, he alienated her from friends and family. Obsessive and consumed by an intense fear of germs, Jose developed compulsive behaviors that bordered on pathological. He refused to use public restrooms or ride public transport unless he could meticulously sanitize the environment. Inside the home, he enforced strict rules. The children were ordered to wash their hands immediately upon entering and were expected to eat in complete silence. Jose, unable to tolerate noise, often wore earplugs to escape even the sounds of his own household. For Ruth, years of emotional manipulation abuse eventually led her to seek professional help. A psychologist helped her identify Jose's behavior as not only abnormal but also deeply harmful. With that clarity came the resolve to escape. In September 2011, Ruth informed Jose of her decision to divorce him. Instead of accepting the separation, Jose began therapy, ostensibly an attempt to change. He met with a psychologist to manage his growing anxiety, but the sessions had little effect. There were signs that Jose's mental health had long been fragile. At the age of 15, he had attempted suicide after a failed relationship, an early indication of his emotional instability. As the divorce proceedings progressed, his behavior became more erratic. He repeatedly contacted his therapist and was prescribed medication, though it seems ineffective in calming his deteriorating mental state. Ruth, focused on creating a new life, moved to Huelva with the children and took refuge at her mother's home. Jose returned to Córdoba. They reached a custody agreement allowing him to see the children every other weekend. On the afternoon of October 8, Jose phoned the police, stating that his two children, then 6 and 2 years old, had disappeared while playing at the park. He claimed they had run off and vanished from sight. Authorities reacted swiftly, initiating a widespread search effort involving law enforcement, emergency responders, and even local taxi drivers. Missing persons posters featuring the children's faces were plastered across the city. Initially, investigators considered the possibility of a kidnapping. But as the hours passed, inconsistencies began to emerge. One big warning sign was that he did not report the children missing until 9 p.m., hours after the children were last believed to have been seen. During his interview with police, Jose suggested that someone from Ruth's family might be responsible for the children's disappearance. However, this theory quickly unraveled when it was confirmed that Ruth and her relatives were all in Huelva at the time, nowhere near Córdoba. Upon learning what had happened, Ruth's immediate reaction was suspicion. She wasted no time and returned to Córdoba at once. Rallying support from her neighbors and family, she organized a vigil, praying for the safe return of her children. As the days wore on, investigators began shifting their attention more closely to Jose's psychological profile. His erratic behavior, history of emotional volatility, and obsessive need for control made him an increasingly suspicious figure. Initially, he had said the children vanished while walking with him. Later, he claimed he had driven to the park and, momentarily distracted by a text message, lost track of them. He also alleged that earlier in the day, the children had been with his sister before he took them to a remote property on the outskirts of Córdoba, arriving around 1:15 p.m. According to him, the children had remained asleep in the car while he set a fire on the property, supposedly to destroy Ruth's personal belongings. He insisted it was a symbolic gesture, an attempt to put the past behind him and rid himself of painful memories. Then, at approximately 5 p.m., he claimed to have gone to the park to meet his brother and nephews, stating once more that the children were still asleep in the vehicle. There were many contradictions in his explanation. To get to the bottom of it, officers decided to inspect the rural property that very night. Jose accompanied them, his demeanor strangely composed. What they found there disturbed them deeply. A deeper search of his car revealed troubling items, sharp kitchen tools and a roll of duct tape. Jose claimed they were simply leftover materials from the family's recent move, but the explanation did little to ease suspicion. The children's disappearance was gaining attention, and authorities pressed Jose with more questions. This time, they obtained security camera footage from the roads between his property and the park. Jose's car could be seen in the footage, but curiously, the children were nowhere in sight. Meanwhile, multiple witnesses at the park recalled seeing Jose alone that day. With the fire now completely extinguished, they closely examined the charred remains. Beneath the ashes, they discovered a peculiar arrangement, a rectangular trench and an overturned iron table, tools likely used to increase the fire's intensity. Sifting through the debris, they uncovered small, fragile bone fragments. The discovery sent a jolt through the investigative team. There was a real possibility that the bones could belong to the missing children. Still, Jose attempted to dismiss the find. He explained that he had incinerated some of Ruth's old possessions, including veterinary materials, books, clothes, and even taxidermied animals used during her studies. But the authorities were unconvinced. They reached out to Ruth and informed her of what had been found. A forensic anthropologist was called in to assess the material. Expert analysis showed that these bones are not human. They appeared to belong to a variety of animals, mostly rodents and small carnivores. While this initially seemed to reduce the weight of suspicion, the investigation was far from over. Jose showed no signs of distress, no urgency, no grief, nothing that would suggest a father desperate to find his children. At this point, the bonfire became the centerpiece of the investigation. Forensic testing showed that it had been fueled with gasoline and consumed nearly 600 pounds of firewood. Several neighbors later came forward, reporting that they had seen the fire burning as early as 3 p.m., a direct contradiction to Jose's claim that it had started later. They also described the smoke as thick and unusually foul-smelling, so strong that it could be smelled from miles away. Investigators began to suspect it might have been the method used to eliminate the children's remains. They excavated the site, hoping to uncover conclusive evidence. But the excavation itself, though thorough, destroyed much of the original layout, possibly erasing key forensic clues in the process. Under mounting pressure, investigators urged Jose to tell the truth. But he remained cold and insistent in his denial, refusing to admit any involvement in the children's disappearance. Meanwhile, Ruth and her family remained active in their search, holding out hope that the children might still be alive. The case had now become a national obsession. News broadcasts, newspapers, and online platforms displayed the children's faces daily. On October 12, 2011, Jose Breton was arrested. Authorities charged him with unlawfully detaining his children and falsely reporting a crime. Though the initial forensic searches of his rural property had failed to yield conclusive results, investigators remained convinced that key evidence lay hidden. A specialist in ground-penetrating radar was brought in, and the property was methodically divided into sectors for scanning. Every square meter of land was meticulously analyzed. After 3 weeks of no results, a judge ruled that Jose must continue to be held in pretrial detention. Specially trained tracking dogs were introduced, their handlers scouring the area for signs of buried remains. Yet again, the results were disappointing. With no new leads from the property itself, search teams turned their attention outward. Helicopters buzzed overhead as divers explored wells, lakes, rivers, and remote quarries. Despite mobilizing a lot of resources, there was not a single clue to the children's whereabouts. Investigators meticulously analyzed Jose's mobile phone records and cross-referenced his movements, looking for anomalies or visits to other locations where the bodies might have been hidden. But their search proved fruitless once again. As 2011 drew to a close, the case remained at a standstill. The children had vanished without a trace. In early 2012, after months of unsuccessful efforts, authorities made the difficult decision to officially call off the search. By this time, investigators were increasingly certain that the children had never been to the park. While in prison, Jose attempted to end his life. Though his injuries were not severe, he was quickly moved to the prison infirmary. Many viewed Jose with deep suspicion, believing he was concealing the truth. Others, most notably members of his own family, stood by him, publicly declaring his innocence. They insisted he would never harm his own children and clung to the belief that perhaps someone else had taken them. Rumors of sightings abroad and whispered theories about an accomplice have added to the tension in the case. 6 months after the disappearance, the court lifted the gag order on the investigation, releasing a trove of previously sealed documents and testimonies. These included statements from individuals who had known Jose personally. Several witnesses painted a chilling portrait of a man who was not only deeply controlling but also capable of vengeful and jealous behavior. Then, in August 2012, nearly a year after the children vanished, Ruth's family, desperate for answers and unsatisfied with the original forensic conclusion, pushed for a second examination of the bone fragments recovered from the bonfire. The bones were, in fact, human. What's more, they belonged to two young children, likely aged between 2 and 6 years old. It not only contradicted the earlier assessment but also exposed a devastating forensic error that had delayed justice for nearly 12 months. Investigators now had confirmation that human remains had been found at Jose's property, matching the profile of his missing children. Public outrage erupted across Spain. The authorities faced fierce criticism for the misstep. To get definitive answers, authorities commissioned a third forensic assessment, this time involving a team of experts from a prestigious university in Madrid. Their findings echoed the previous conclusion with even greater precision. The bone fragments were undeniably human and corresponded to the remains of two young children. Although the defense sought to cast doubt on the results, suggesting potential mishandling of evidence or flaws in the chain of custody, investigators stood firm. The remains had been processed by the National Forensic Laboratory, and the scientific evidence was unambiguous. Both children had perished and their bodies had been destroyed in the fire. Forensic specialists highlighted the arrangement of the bones within the ash bed, a detail that helped them reconstruct how the bodies had been positioned. While it remained impossible to confirm whether the children were alive at the time the fire was set, the overwhelming evidence pointed to a deliberate and methodical cremation. For Ruth Ortiz, the discovery was devastating. After nearly a year of anguish and unanswered questions, she could finally say goodbye to her children with the dignity they deserved. In September 2012, bolstered by the mountain of evidence and corroborating expert testimony, the court officially charged Jose Breton with 2 counts of aggravated murder. The charges included the aggravating circumstance of kinship. He had not only killed but had done so as a father. While awaiting trial, Jose was subjected to a thorough psychological evaluation. Though he exhibited signs consistent with narcissistic and antisocial personality disorders, experts found no indications of mental illness severe enough to impair his judgment. He was fully aware of what he had done. Despite the evidence against him, Jose never admitted guilt. Investigators concluded that the murders were a premeditated act of vengeance, an attempt to punish Ruth in the cruelest way imaginable. Between September 29 and October 7, 2011, Jose had taken calculated steps to prepare for the crime. Records showed that he visited a psychiatrist, ostensibly for anxiety, and acquired sedatives. He later denied ever obtaining them, but the investigation proved otherwise. It's believed these medications were used to sedate the children, either rendering them unconscious or, potentially, ending their lives before the fire. Jose quietly assembled the tools of his plan. He gathered firewood, bought gasoline, and mapped out a detailed sequence of actions to ensure his plan succeeded. To make sure it would work, he even conducted a test run. Once, he left his sister's children home alone for a short time to see how they would behave. On the night of October 7th, Jose collected his children and spent the evening at his parents' house. Early the next morning, October 8th, he drove them to his rural property, supposedly for a day of family time. Before setting out, it is believed he administered the sedatives, rendering the children unconscious in the back seat of the car. Upon arrival at the property, he attempted to contact Ruth by phone. When she didn't respond, he proceeded with the next phase of his plan without hesitation. In a secluded area behind the house, Jose constructed a large bonfire. He placed the children's bodies beneath an overturned iron table, designed to intensify the heat, poured gasoline over the woodpile, and lit the fire. The fire, fueled by dry wood, burned for hours. By the time he was finished, only scorched fragments remained. Around 5:30 p.m., having completed the grisly act, Jose left the property and drove to a location near a local park. There, he carefully laid the foundation for his alibi. He contacted both his brother and mother, claiming to be with the children at the park, reinforcing the narrative he would soon present to police. Once he felt confident in his fabricated timeline, he began executing the next part of his plan, one designed to deflect suspicion and buy time. He began calling family members, feigning panic and urging them to help in a search he knew was futile. Eventually, he phoned emergency services to report the children missing. Later that evening, he appeared at the police station to file an official report, delivering a rehearsed story that he knew was a lie from beginning to end. The trial of Jose Breton commenced on June 17, 2013, capturing national attention with its chilling details. His posture was rigid, his expression unreadable, and his gaze unflinching, a calm demeanor that felt disturbingly disconnected from the gravity of the accusations. As the trial began, both the prosecution and the defense presented their arguments. Jose took the stand and remained defiant. He categorically denied all allegations, portraying himself as a loving father who would have given his life for his children. In an attempt to deflect blame, he accused the authorities of negligence, insisting they had wasted valuable time focusing on him instead of actively searching for his missing children. He told the court that it was unbelievable that they still didn't know where his kids were. Ruth Ortiz recounted a marriage marred by manipulation, emotional torment, and episodes of physical abuse. Through tears, she described the toll Jose's controlling nature had taken on her and their children. She recalled Jose slapping their young son in public, an act so cruel that she had to intervene, warning him never to do it again. Forensic experts took the stand next, confirming that the remains found in the bonfire were indeed human. They emphasized that the evidence had been handled meticulously and that there was no doubt the fragments belonged to two small children. But perhaps the most valuable testimony came from a close family member, Ruth's cousin. He recounted that Jose had made chilling admissions in private, confessing on 3 separate occasions that he had killed his children. Jose had told him that he would never find them alive and that they were dead. Despite his continued denials, the prosecution remained unwavering. They argued that the evidence, physical, forensic, and testimonial, left no room for doubt. This was not a case of a father overwhelmed by circumstance. It was, they insisted, an act of calculated revenge by a man who sought to inflict the deepest pain possible on his ex-wife. After 3 days of deliberation, on July 12, 2013, the jury returned its verdict, guilty. At 40 years old, Jose Breton was convicted of murdering his 2 children in an act of premeditated cruelty. As the sentence was read aloud, he remained expressionless. For Ruth and her family, the decision brought a measure of justice, though the wounds left behind would take a lifetime to heal. 10 days later, on July 22, the court sentenced him to 20 years in prison for each murder, along with an additional penalty for filing a false police report. Jose's legal team quickly pursued an appeal, filing a cassation motion in March 2014 on the grounds that his right to the presumption of innocence had been violated. However, Spain's Supreme Court rejected the claim and upheld the 40-year sentence. Then, in 2015, the Provincial Court of Córdoba revised the total sentence, reducing it to 25 years. The decision sparked public debate but did little to change the situation. The case returned in October 2016. Reports emerged that Jose had attempted suicide while in prison. However, his lawyer later claimed it might have been an assault by another inmate. He was hospitalized for several weeks before returning to prison, where he continued to receive visitors. Among them was his mother, one of the few people who still believed in his innocence. Under Spanish law, inmates can request temporary release after serving a quarter of their sentence, in Jose's case, after roughly 7 years. But when he submitted such a request in 2019, it was denied. Officials cited his continued refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing, his complete lack of remorse, and his failure to apologize or offer any gesture of restitution. Then, in 2021, after nearly a decade of silence and denial, a surprising revelation emerged. During a rehabilitation therapy session in prison, Jose is said to have confessed to the crime. In a setting surrounded by other prisoners, many of whom were also convicted of serious crimes, he confessed. According to reports, he revealed that he was incarcerated for murdering his children. Though it was too late to save anyone from the pain his actions had caused, for Ruth, the confession may have served as confirmation of what she had long believed. The case of Jose Breton resurfaced in the national consciousness once again in March 2025. A Spanish newspaper ignited renewed outrage and sorrow after publishing excerpts from a forthcoming book containing a series of prison confessions by Jose himself. Through more than 60 letters and multiple interviews conducted between 2016 and 2025, he finally told the truth. In these writings, Jose not only confessed to the murders but also offered a belated, handwritten apology to Ruth. He admitted he lacked the courage to ever face her in person or ask for forgiveness directly. For Ruth, who had spent the past decade honoring the memory of her children and tirelessly advocating for victims of domestic abuse. Although Jose remains in custody, the timing and content of his confession have raised questions. Some speculate it could be used in appeals for leniency or sentence review. Given the brutality of the crime, the calculated nature of his actions, and the years of denial, many believe he should never be granted reduced time or prison privileges. Tracy Ocasio was born in 1982 in Ocoee, Florida, to Elizabeth and Joe Ocasio. From a young age, she shared a close bond with her father and was affectionately known as a daddy's girl. She is ambitious and curious, dreams of becoming a radiologist, and has a great love for animals. Her pet interests are varied, including scorpions, lizards, and a fluffy cat named Cookie. Additionally, she enjoyed being creative, often making handmade jewelry in her free time and getting lost in books, especially those about history and ancient civilizations, such as World War II and Rome. The Ocasio family was very close. Tracy made it a point to call her mom every day to share the small details of her life. After high school, she worked as a waitress at a local restaurant while taking online college classes to pursue her education. At one point, she moved out to live with her fiancé, but after the engagement ended, she returned to live with her parents, who were happy to have her back. Tracy and her dad, Joe, share a passion for sports, particularly basketball. They were devoted fans of the Orlando Magic, and watching games together became a beloved tradition for them. At 27, Tracy was enjoying a vibrant and promising life with clear goals, strong family connections, and a sense of direction. Everything changed on May 26, 2009, when she eagerly anticipated the Orlando Magic playoff game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Originally, she planned to watch it with her dad, but due to an unexpected work commitment, he couldn't make it. Instead, she decided to go by herself to the Florida Tap Room on Raleigh Street, a bar she often visited and where she knew many patrons. The bar was bustling with basketball fans, creating a lively atmosphere that felt familiar and safe to her. She watched the game amidst cheers and excitement, but after it ended, something went terribly wrong. Tracy never returned home. Tracy's mother, Elizabeth, grew increasingly worried when she didn't hear from Tracy after the game, as her daughter was typically in contact. Tracy had also mentioned that she would come straight home after the game. As hours passed without word, Elizabeth realized that Tracy had disappeared. The following day, her family reported her missing, and the search commenced. Investigators focused on the last place she was seen, the Florida Tap Room. Surveillance footage from the bar revealed important information. Tracy was observed leaving between 1 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. with a bald man who seemed to be around her age. They looked relaxed and were engaged in conversation as they exited together. Elizabeth and Joe did not recognize the man. That night, Tracy wore black jeans, a tank top, a hooded jacket, and a green and white hat. The footage showed no signs of distress. She seemed aware and left willingly. Consequently, identifying the man became a priority for investigators. While searching for Tracy, a significant discovery was made. On the evening of May 27th, her yellow 2002 two-door Chevrolet Cobalt was found parked on Franklin Street in Ocoee. This was the same car she had used to go to the bar the previous night. The vehicle was left unlocked in a dark, isolated area with no street lights or nearby traffic, giving it an abandoned look. Inside, there were no personal belongings, no bag, no phone, nothing at all. One detail that stood out to investigators was that both front seats were reclined forward, suggesting that someone might have accessed the back seat or attempted to help someone get in or out. This was unusual for Tracy, as she rarely used the back seat of her compact car, which was cramped and not comfortable for adults. Any possessions she had would likely be in the trunk. Furthermore, her father, Joe, emphasized that she disliked dark areas and would never intentionally park in one unless absolutely necessary. This raised the question, why was her car left there? The answer soon became clear. The man who was seen with Tracy on the night of May 26 was identified as James Hadaway. When detectives contacted him, he was surprisingly willing to talk. James shared that he met Tracy at the Florida Tap Room, where they chatted during the game. He then asked her for a ride because he didn't have a car. According to James, Tracy dropped him off and drove off. However, her car was discovered only a few yards from his home, where he lived with his father. This connection made James the last person known to be with Tracy, and her abandoned car was essentially on his doorstep, raising suspicion. Investigators examined Tracy's phone data, revealing that her phone had turned off around 8:30 a.m. on May 27th, the morning after the game, with its last location ping matching where her car was found. This provided sufficient reason for police to obtain a search warrant for James' house. Inside, they found no signs of Tracy and no personal belongings of hers, but they did discover a large amount of banned substances. It was revealed that James had been using banned substances while out on bond, leading to his arrest. More disturbing details emerged when it became known that James had a lengthy criminal history, including charges related to juvenile kidnapping. Shortly after his arrest, two witnesses, who were friends of James, came forward stating they had seen him leave the bar that night with a woman resembling Tracy. One witness even claimed to have seen her enter his home and stay there briefly, alleging that he had encouraged her to try a banned substance, which she refused. This contradicts James's earlier assertion that Tracy simply dropped him off and then drove away. James was in custody but not charged in connection with Tracy's disappearance, and his situation was becoming increasingly complicated. Detectives focused all their efforts on locating Tracy, utilizing bloodhounds. However, it was surprising that the dogs could not detect her scent in her own car. As the investigation continued, Tracy's father, Joe, took action by distributing flyers throughout Ocoee and searching parks, streets, and vacant lots for any trace of his daughter, but he found no leads. The family also reached out to Tim Miller, founder of Texas EquiSearch, for assistance. Volunteers searched over 2,500 acres of land, yet there was still no sign of Tracy. Detectives persisted in questioning James, but he refused to disclose any information about Tracy. As nearly a month passed since her disappearance, their suspicions about him grew. Investigating James's background revealed a concerning history of trouble, including substance abuse, inconsistent employment, and questionable activities such as illegally dumping debris. Although he was already facing charges, new troubling details about his past came to light during his trial. People acquainted with James reported unsettling experiences, noting his unpredictable mood swings that could shift from friendly to violent without warning. Several women expressed feelings of danger when around him. The most disturbing story emerged, closely resembling Tracy's situation. Almost a year before Tracy disappeared, a woman named Rachel Clark gave James a ride home. As they said their goodbyes, James suddenly turned aggressive. He attacked Rachel, knocked her to the ground, and whispered that she shouldn't make him kill her. She fought back and screamed until a passerby intervened, scaring James away. Rachel survived, but she suffered severe bruises, scratches, and trauma. Her experience echoed Tracy's last moments with James. Although no charges were initially filed against James regarding Tracy's case, he quickly became the main suspect due to his lies, previous criminal record, his presence near Tracy's abandoned car, and his violent history. What made the situation even more frustrating was that James was never charged for his vicious attack on Rachel Clark. She had filed a police report, but when detectives tried to find him, he had disappeared until almost a year later when he became the primary suspect in Tracy's disappearance. Once James was back in focus, investigators reopened Rachel's case, determined to ensure he was held accountable, especially since they strongly believed he was involved in Tracy's case. The search for Tracy continued. However, on February 22, 2011, nearly 2 years after her disappearance, something unexpected happened. Detectives searched Carter Lake, which had nearly dried up. During the search, they found what appeared to be human remains, including a part of a spine and a skull. As the lake continued to recede, more bones were uncovered. 2 days later, on February 24, authorities discovered a wallet, an ID card, and a cell phone nearby, all belonging to a man named Chris George. This was not the information the detectives had been hoping for. They had hoped to find clues about Tracy, but instead had stumbled upon an entirely different person. But who was Chris George? He and Tracy were not connected, but both were linked to someone named James Hadaway. DNA tests confirmed that the remains belonged to Chris, adding a new element to the investigation. Police began to explore the possible relationship between Chris and James. During this time, numerous tips were received, including an anonymous call to Tracy's father, Joe. The caller claimed to know a woman who had helped James, and according to her, James was linked to 3 different murders in the Orlando area. The tip also stated that the bodies and murder weapons were disposed of in local lakes, which spurred further searches of these lakes. Detectives took the tip seriously despite the possibility that it might be false, particularly given James' violent past. They found that Chris had last been seen with James and another person in early February 2009, shortly after James had assaulted Rachel and just before Tracy went missing. Chris, who lived in Apopka, had been reported missing on February 11, 2009. Witnesses reported seeing James and another man leaving a wooded area and acting suspiciously. A patrol officer had even stopped them that night. When asked about Chris, James claimed his friend was high and needed help, so the officer let them go without further inquiry. Soon after, Chris's vehicle was found abandoned at Lake Carter, the same location where his remains and belongings were later discovered. Once authorities confirmed Chris's identity, they informed his family. Unfortunately, the results of Chris's autopsy were inconclusive. Due to advanced decomposition, no official cause of death could be established. Even though James was present at the scene, there wasn't enough physical evidence to charge him with Chris's death. However, detectives were determined. They recognized that they had a solid case against James for Rachel's assault, which became their starting point. At that time, James was in Seminole County Jail on unrelated charges, but with Rachel's testimony and physical evidence now available, they were prepared to prosecute him. In May 2011, the trial for the attempted murder of Rachel began, with Rachel as the key witness against her attacker, James Hadaway. She bravely took the stand and recounted in detail the horrifying incident of the night he assaulted her after she gave him a ride. She described how he suddenly attacked her, tackling her to the ground and violently assaulting her while making threatening remarks. James sat expressionless in the courtroom as she recounted his actions. His defense team argued that he was drunk and unable to remember what had happened that night, suggesting that it was all a misunderstanding due to the abuse of banned substances. However, the jury was shown graphic photos of Rachel's injuries, her bruised neck, scratched arms, and battered face. This evidence silenced the courtroom and confirmed that Rachel's pain was genuine and intense. It became evident to everyone present that this was not a case of drunken confusion or a mere impulsive act. The attack on Rachel was intentional, brutal, and frightening. After a tense period of deliberation, the jury found James guilty of attempted murder, as well as burglary, robbery, and false imprisonment. He was sentenced to life in prison. After the sentencing, James stood up to address the court, apologizing to Rachel. He acknowledged that her injuries were his fault and sincerely apologized for what had happened. He stated that he didn't intend to hurt her, but he regretted what occurred. For many present, his words felt insincere. The idea that he could cause such trauma and then simply say sorry, as if that might make it all disappear, was infuriating. Rachel had fought to survive. She bore the physical and emotional scars from that night, and no apology could take that away. Regarding Tracy's case, investigators had to confront a harsh reality. achieving justice for her was unlikely. While there was strong suspicion about James, there wasn't enough evidence to file charges. James remained the main suspect, but suspicion alone couldn't lead to a conviction. Tracy's father, Joe, spoke out after the trial, stating that if there was any consolation, it was that the person was in prison and wouldn't harm another family as he had harmed theirs. Then, unexpectedly, James appealed his conviction in 2015, claiming that his lawyers had pressured him into waiving his right to a speedy trial. His appeal was accepted, which led to a new hearing, but the outcome remained unchanged. He continued to serve his life sentence. 15 years have passed since Tracy was last seen leaving the Florida Tap Room, a place she cherished. Her disappearance has created a profound emptiness in the lives of her parents, Joe and Elizabeth, who are still seeking answers. They live with a mix of heartbreak, fear, and hope, often feeling all of these emotions at once. Joe struggles with guilt, frequently reflecting on the night Tracy decided to go out on her own. He feels that if he had been with her, things might have turned out differently. However, he knows it wasn't his fault. No one could have predicted what would happen. If blame is to be placed, it falls on James. Yet, without solid evidence, justice remains elusive. The case is still open, and Detective David Gray is committed to pursuing every lead, regardless of how insignificant it may seem. Tracy's family holds on to the hope that one day they will uncover the truth, as no family should have to endure what they have. On a summer evening in July 2011, Laura Jean Ackerson got into her car and drove toward Raleigh, North Carolina. She was going to pick up her kids from her ex, Grant Hayes. It was supposed to be a quick visit, just like many others before, but this time Laura didn't come back. At first, her friends weren't too worried. Maybe she got delayed, maybe her phone died. But when days went by with no word from her, they knew something was wrong. It seems like something terrible has happened. The police would later find an apartment that had a strong smell of bleach, items were missing, a strange letter appeared, and Grant and his new wife were suddenly on the move. So what really happened to Laura that night? Let's find out the truth behind it. Laura Ackerson entered the world on April 30th, 1984, born to Roger and Brenda Ackerson. From the very beginning, Laura was a bright, lively child with a warm and vibrant spirit. She spent her early years attending Grace Fellowship Church with her family, where she quickly became known for her sweet nature and gentle heart. Everything changed for Laura in 1996. That year marked the collapse of what once seemed like a picture-perfect family. Her parents' constant fighting eventually led to divorce when Laura was just 12. The split hit her hard and left emotional scars that would linger. After the divorce, Brenda took Laura and moved to Iowa. Laura later pursued graphic design, drawn by a natural flair for creativity. She had an instinct for art, color composition, and visual storytelling. Eventually, Laura relocated to Kinston, North Carolina, hoping for a fresh beginning. There, she attended a real estate school. She found work in marketing and design. She also built a circle of close friends. Having moved around so much growing up, Laura had never had a stable friend group, so, finally, she felt like she belonged. In March 2007, while dining at a local restaurant, Laura met a man named Grant Hayes. Interestingly, they shared a birthday, April 30th. They sparked an immediate connection. Born in 1979 in Raleigh, Grant had a musical streak and a strong religious upbringing. He gained local recognition as a performer, playing small venues and bars. Years before meeting Laura, Grant had married a woman whom he'd fallen for soon after high school graduation. That relationship burned fast and bright, then fizzled out. Their divorce left a deep mark on Grant, who had written love songs inspired by her. With the end of that marriage came a decline in his mental health. He was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression. He prescribed powerful medications like lithium. But instead of sticking with treatment, Grant began self-medicating with alcohol and harder substances. As time passed, Grant's behavior grew more erratic. He dabbled in synthetic hallucinogens, which only amplified his worst traits: narcissism, paranoia, and aggression. He started having bizarre delusions, believing aliens controlled a government and that he was a chosen one destined to survive the apocalypse by finding a spaceship. He even rejected modern medicine, including vaccines, convinced they were harmful. Despite his deteriorating mental state, Grant's music career was still afloat. He was booking regular gigs, and that's around the time Laura came into his life. To outsiders, Grant might have looked like a rising star, but behind closed doors, his relationship with Laura quickly became toxic. He was controlling, physically and emotionally abusive. Worst of all, he is chronically unfaithful. Laura, already emotionally fragile from her childhood, struggled to break free. He isolated her from her friends and dictated nearly every part of her life, from her social circle to her daily routine. Shockingly, they tied the knot just months after meeting. Laura, longing for stability and love after years of emotional turmoil, believed she had found her fairy tale ending. But her friends were blindsided by the news. None of them even knew she was in a relationship, let alone married. Still, they stood by her, hoping she had made the right choice. Shortly thereafter, Laura discovered she was pregnant. She felt immense joy, imagining the new journey ahead as a mother. Grant, on the other hand, wasn't thrilled. The news only intensified his possessiveness. When their son, Grant Jr., was born, Laura poured every bit of love she had into him. Naming the baby after himself seemed like a classic move from Grant, not necessarily a sentimental one, but more a display of ego. Laura adored her son. Meanwhile, Grant was still chasing gigs, cheating, and indulging in banned substance, showing little interest in fatherhood. Eventually, he was offered a job in the Virgin Islands. He took it without hesitation, leaving Laura and their newborn behind in North Carolina. Whether or not he was actually working there is unclear, but one thing's for sure, he wasn't alone. Grant began seeing a woman named Amanda Perry, a single mother and aspiring actress. Amanda had scored small, uncredited roles in shows like The Sopranos and The Stepford Wives, but her career hadn't taken off. That's where another chapter in this tangled story begins. Grant was instantly drawn to Amanda, and not just because of her charm. Amanda had money, nearly $200,000 in cash and $80,000 worth of jewelry, possibly from her previous divorce, though that's never been confirmed. At the time Grant met her, he was flat broke, no savings, no stability. Amanda had resources, and that changed everything for him. Their relationship progressed quickly. For Grant, being with Amanda was more than romance, it was leverage. He flaunted the affair, making no effort to hide it from Laura. In fact, he used it as a weapon, taunting her at every opportunity. After years of enduring his manipulation, betrayal, and cruelty, Laura finally stood up, said she was leaving him for good. Surprisingly, even people close to Grant supported her decision. His own family, along with his ex-wife, encouraged Laura to walk away, they fully aware of how toxic Grant really was. But then came a twist. Laura discovered she was pregnant again. Despite everything Grant had put her through, she gave him yet another chance, even though by now it was more like chance number 10. That decision spoke volumes about how deeply Laura loved her children. She was willing to endure emotional hardship just to try to keep her family intact, likely driven by the pain of her own parents' divorce. Trying to make things work, Laura packed up her life and moved to the Virgin Islands with her son, Grant Jr., hoping proximity might help fix things. However, Grant didn't see her arrival as a loving gesture. To him, it was an inconvenience. With Laura around, he couldn't keep living a double life. Eventually, Laura gave birth to her second son, Gentle. Sadly, the baby faced serious health issues right from the start, and the family needed better access to medical care, so they relocated back to North Carolina. Grant was furious about the move. He blamed Laura and the kids for dragging him away from potential opportunities in the Virgin Islands. Meanwhile, Amanda remained in the picture, now living in New York, and urged Grant to explore opportunities in the entertainment industry there. Grant then went to be with Amanda, and he loved it. He was finally close to her, away from his responsibilities, and immersed in a city full of distractions. Eventually, he reached out to Laura with a surprising request. He asked if he could take Grant Jr. for a diaper modeling photo shoot, promising he'd bring him right back. Laura hesitated but agreed. What she didn't know was that Grant had a completely different plan. When he didn't return their son as promised, Laura turned to Facebook for clues, and what she found shattered her. Grant had secretly married Amanda in New York and was now living with her along with Grant Jr. Laura was devastated. But the nightmare wasn't over. When Laura called Grant to confront him, he claimed that their marriage was never legal. In search of clarity, Laura checked their marriage certificate and discovered that Grant's signature was missing. This meant that their marriage was never legally valid. Then came the most gut-wrenching part. Grant and Amanda had filed for emergency custody of Grant Jr. They won because there was no formal custody agreement and because Laura had no job or stable housing. The court sided with Grant. He showed up to the hearings alone and claimed Laura was unfit. The court ruled in his favor without ever hearing her side of the story. She went back to court and presented strong evidence showing Grant's abusive behavior and unstable mental health. Her determination forced the court to order psychological evaluations for both parents. In the meantime, Laura was allowed to speak with her sons daily and see them on weekends, but even then, Grant and Amanda, now pregnant with his child, found ways to make those moments unbearable. They interrupted phone calls, limited her access to her boys, and did everything possible to keep Laura at a distance. Still, Laura held on. Grant's psychological evaluation did not go well. The report highlighted that he lacked a genuine connection with his children, whereas the kids were much more relaxed and happier around Laura. In contrast, Laura was portrayed as a dedicated and caring mother who always prioritized her children. The court took these findings seriously and mandated a deeper evaluation of Grant's situation. At around the same time, Amanda gave birth to a daughter on June 9, 2011. After a lengthy custody battle, the court decided on a rotating custody schedule, with the children spending 3 days with one parent and 4 days with the other. By this point, Grant was barely holding himself together, his temper was worsening, and it was clear something was boiling beneath the surface. Then came the moment when everything fell apart. On July 13, 2011, Laura had plans to meet her close friend and business partner, Chavon, later that evening, but she never showed up and never called. At first, Chavon didn't panic. Laura had mentioned earlier that she needed to stop by Grant's place to pick up her boys. Laura's last known communication was a text Laura sent to Grant, letting him know she was on her way. He never replied. Days passed with no word, no calls, no texts, nothing. By July 18th, after 5 days of total silence, 27-year-old Laura Ackerson was officially reported missing by loved ones. Police acted quickly and searched her apartment, which appeared completely normal. There were no signs of a struggle or anything out of place. Surveillance footage revealed that she left the building but never returned. Their next stop was Grant and Amanda's apartment. Officers arrived with a search warrant and immediately felt that something was wrong. Grant and Amanda was not home. Inside the apartment, a strong smell of bleach overwhelmed them. The place had been thoroughly cleaned and was suspiciously spotless. Several items were noticeably missing: a shower curtain, a vacuum cleaner, and multiple rugs. Certain patches on the floor were discolored, indicating they had been scrubbed with harsh chemicals. However, what truly unsettled the investigators were 2 pieces of paper they found. The first item found was a handwritten draft of a song. The lyrics described a disturbing scenario in which a woman is murdered by strangulation. The second piece of paper appeared to be an agreement, supposedly signed by Laura, in which she stated she would give up custody of her children to Grant for $25,000. Anyone who knew Laura would recognize this as implausible. Her children meant everything to her, and she would never assign a monetary value to being with them. This agreement looked like a forgery. At this point, the police understood that they needed to act quickly. They had to locate Grant and Amanda as soon as possible. Security camera footage helped establish a timeline. After July 13th, Amanda was seen with the kids at a local Chick-fil-A, while Grant was spotted shopping early on July 14th at both Walmart and Target in Raleigh. What he bought was alarming: goggles, bleach, trash bags, tape, a reciprocating saw with blades, and a lint roller. That wasn't all. Later that day, Amanda made a peculiar request to her daughter, asking her to look after the kids for most of the day. Then, on July 16th, Grant made another unsettling purchase, large amounts of ice and coolers. Shortly after, he rented a U-Haul trailer. Grant, Amanda, and the two boys traveled to Richmond, Texas, ostensibly to visit Amanda's sister, Karen. They arrived around July 19th, but Grant made another suspicious stop at a local Home Depot, where he bought heavy-duty gloves and 8 bottles of acid. Texas police, now collaborating with North Carolina authorities, paid a visit to Karen Berry. What she told them was alarming. On the night of July 19th, Grant and Amanda had asked to borrow a boat. They wanted to go out to Oyster Creek, a remote, gator-filled canal with thick vegetation and murky water. Grant and Amanda asked whether the alligators in Oyster Creek ate humans, whether wild hogs could consume flesh, and whether bloodthirsty sharks were native to Texas waters. Karen assumed these were just strange Grant's questions, but to investigators, it was clear they were scouting for a body dump site. A team of officers was dispatched to Oyster Creek right away, while another team searched the area for surveillance footage. Both initiatives yielded significant findings. After hours of navigating through the dangerous waters filled with reeds and lily pads, the police uncovered remains in Oyster Creek. They identified the remains as belonging to Laura. The condition of her body was so severe that determining the exact cause of death proved challenging. Nevertheless, forensic experts suggested she likely died from manual strangulation or a substantial blow to the neck. The evidence was compelling: the bleach-stained apartment, the forged custody letter, unsettling purchases, disturbing song lyrics, and Laura's remains found. Her death was not due to an accident or a moment of anger. It was the result of a calculated and cold-blooded plan. Grant and Amanda were no longer merely suspects. They were now identified as murderers. When investigators found Laura's car, a white 2006 Ford Focus, it was evident that someone had made significant efforts to clean it. The interior was thoroughly washed, but there was noticeable damage to the back of the car. More incriminating evidence emerged when surveillance footage showed Amanda near Karen's home disposing of acid bottles just 13 days after Laura was last seen. The case took a significant turn on July 25, 2011, when Grant and Amanda were arrested at Grant's parents' house in North Carolina. They were both charged in connection with Laura's death. Their trials were conducted separately, and each attempted to deflect blame onto the other. Grant claimed that Laura had arrived at their apartment on July 13th and threatened Amanda, saying she would take her daughter as her own sons had been taken. Grant alleged that Amanda reacted violently during the confrontation and killed Laura, while he merely assisted in covering it up. Amanda portrayed herself as a victim, claiming that Grant had been emotionally abusive and manipulative for years. She recounted an incident where Laura and Grant had a heated argument. During the fight, Laura accidentally hit her head. Amanda claimed she didn't see this happen because she was in another room with the children. She stated that when Grant informed her Laura was hurt, he told her to leave with the kids while he called for help. After going to Chick-fil-A, Amanda returned to find Laura missing. Grant casually assured her that Laura was fine and had already left. It was only when they were in Texas, Grant confessed the truth about the incident and threatened her to help him cover it up. However, the overwhelming evidence contradicted their accounts. Both Grant and Amanda pleaded not guilty, but the court rejected their claims. On September 16, 2013, Grant Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His behavior in court was unsettling. He smiled, laughed, and showed no remorse, as if he were going on vacation instead of facing justice for a horrific crime. Amanda was sentenced months later, on February 19, 2014, to 13 to 16 years in prison. During her sentencing, the judge expressed his belief that Amanda had the opportunity to prevent what happened to Laura, but instead chose to participate. Although she expressed remorse in court, many doubted its sincerity, viewing it as just another act. Amanda's legal troubles didn't end there. Texas authorities charged her with tampering with evidence, resulting in a 20-year sentence on top of her previous charges. Investigators believe that Grant deceived Laura into coming to his apartment by promising her false hopes. He told her that she would be able to see her children and possibly take them home, he claimed he was prepared to grant her full custody. This manipulation is likely why Laura traveled alone from Kinston to Raleigh, despite her friends warning her not to meet Grant without someone accompanying her. Unfortunately, Laura fell victim to a trap. One theory suggests that upon her arrival, Grant and Amanda pressured her to write and sign a custody letter, threatening her with the loss of her children if she refused. After that, she was attacked, either strangled or hit with a deadly blow. This act was cold, calculated, and alarmingly cruel. The motive? Likely, Grant intended to eliminate Laura permanently so he could live with Amanda without the complications of custody disputes and court hearings. The ultimate irony is that Amanda and Grant divorced just a year later, in October 2014. All of Grant's actions, the lies, the violence, the destruction, ultimately achieved nothing. Today, Laura's 2 sons and Amanda's daughter are being raised by Grant's parents, who are kind and supportive, in stark contrast to their father. It's tragic to consider the childhood these boys lost, growing up without their mother due to their father's selfishness. Laura Ackerson was a loving and creative woman. She was a devoted mother, a loyal friend, and a daughter who deserved much more. Her death was the result of severe manipulation and cruelty, emphasizing the importance of recognizing our own worth, setting boundaries, and distancing ourselves from those who would harm us, no matter how much love we feel we can give. Although Laura didn't have the chance to start anew, her story may inspire someone else to understand that it's never too late to prioritize themselves. Chelsea King was born on July 2, 1992, in Poway, California. After her birth, her parents, Brent and Kelly King, faced some challenges. A medical error during childbirth resulted in Kelly developing Asherman syndrome, a condition in which scar tissue forms in the uterus or cervix. Despite these difficulties, Chelsea was very close to her family, especially her younger brother, and made a point to spend quality time with them. The King family moved frequently, first to the Bay Area in San Francisco, then to Naperville, Illinois, and finally settling in Poway, San Diego County, California. By 2007, Chelsea was a bright and cheerful student, earning an A grade in high school and maintaining a GPA of 3.2. She is a vegetarian who loves nature, as evident from her enjoyment of walking in the park. She and her friends even planned a cleanup of the Bernardo Ranch Community Park, which she visited on February 25, 2010. On that day, Chelsea left home at 6:15 a.m. and usually returned by 5 p.m. When 6 p.m. arrived without her return or any communication, her parents became concerned. They discovered her phone was turned off, prompting them to call her friends to check on her whereabouts. To their dismay, none of her friends knew her plans, and no one had seen her since she left school. This sparked fear in her parents. Chelsea's father, Brent, decided to track her phone through AT&T and discovered that it was near Bernardo Ranch Park. He immediately went there to search for her and found her car, with her school uniform and handbag in the back seat. Chelsea loved to run and frequently organized solo runs before returning home. However, she had recently lost consciousness during one of her jogs. Connecting the dots, Brent decided to call the police, fearing that his daughter might have fainted again while running and could be unable to seek help. The search for Chelsea involved not only the police but also support from the local community. They noticed disturbing similarities to a disappearance that had occurred the year before. The community quickly formed a volunteer group to support the King family. Her mother, Kelly, expressed deep gratitude, stating that their help was truly encouraging. Search teams, including dog handlers, helicopters, and volunteers on foot, scoured Chelsea's usual routes, the park, and the area around her home. During the search, some clues were discovered along the path, including her underwear and shoes. Forensic scientist Mary Schiffer examined blood found on the underwear, and DNA testing confirmed that it belonged to Chelsea. Additionally, shocking findings revealed the presence of biological fluid from a man on the underwear. This fluid was cross-referenced with police databases and matched to 31-year-old John Albert Gardner. John is also a suspect in another case, the disappearance of Amber Dubois, a 14-year-old girl. There were rumors in the community that Amber had run away with someone she met online. On February 13, 2009, 14-year-old Amber Dubois, from Escondido, California, went missing while heading to Escondido High School. Born on October 25, 1994, Amber lived with her mother, Carrie McGonigal, and her mother's boyfriend, David Cave, but she often spent weekends with her father, Mo Dubois. That day was cold and rainy, and Amber's classes typically ended around 2:45 p.m. She usually returned home about an hour after school. When she didn't come home, her parents grew concerned. David went to the school to pick her up, but the teacher informed him that she had not been there that day. Immediately, David and Carrie filed a missing person report, and the police in Escondido began to investigate. Friends and family joined the search, but there was no sign of Amber. Her parents felt a glimmer of hope when investigators revealed that her phone had been briefly activated. The police then urged all residents of Escondido to report any information they might have about Amber's whereabouts. Some individuals claimed to have seen Amber in the days before her disappearance. These accounts suggested that she might not have been kidnapped but could have run away. Despite that, her mother, Carrie, insisted that Amber would never voluntarily leave home, but she could not convince the authorities to agree with her opinion. Renaissance High School organized a search and rescue effort, in which officers and volunteers distributed flyers and searched the area for clues. David, who was the last person to communicate with Amber before she went missing, took a lie detector test 8 times, with all results coming back negative. Yet, Carrie continued to harbor suspicions about him. John Albert Gardner was born on April 9, 1979, in Culver City, California. Due to his father's alcoholism and his mother's long work hours, John often stayed with relatives who took care of him. He became close to his older cousins, Shannon and Serena. From a young age, John struggled with constant allergies, ear infections, and asthma, which made him restless and selective. As he got older, his behavior grew worse. By age 4, he had significant impulse control issues and needed medication at school to help him focus. He exhibited frequent outbursts of anger, spoke of self-harm, and expressed feelings of self-hatred. As his condition failed to improve, he became depressed, especially when he couldn't take his medication at night. In February 1989, John was hospitalized at UCLA, where he was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and emotional issues. Doctors observed that he tended to be aggressive toward peers and often lost control. At the age of 21, John assaulted a 30-year-old neighbor and faced charges for both the assault and abuse. Initially, he denied both allegations but later admitted to hitting the woman while maintaining that he did not abuse her. In 2000, he was convicted of the assault and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Throughout this time, he claimed to be a victim of the legal system despite substantial evidence against him. John's mother, Kathy Osborne, testified in court that her son attacked the woman because he believed she was in love with him and pleaded for him to receive psychiatric treatment instead of prison. The court denied her request, and he was sentenced to incarceration. John, 31 years old, saw a decline in his mental health and often considered self-harm. On February 19, 2010, he was taken to the hospital after consuming a large dose of the drug Prima, but he was discharged the same day. On the morning of February 24, 2010, John's mother, Kathy, drove for 2 hours to visit John's grandmother. They did not return home until 1 a.m. on February 25. John was not at home at the time and did not answer his mother's phone calls. He eventually returned home around 8 p.m., dirty and carrying a decapitated snake. John claimed that the snake had attacked him and that he had killed it, but he had a deep wound on his nose that did not resemble a snake bite. The following day, while at a nail salon, Kathy saw news about a girl named Chelsea King. Authorities had used DNA evidence to identify a suspect and quickly located John. He was arrested at a bar on the west shore of Lake Hodges. Despite his frantic claims of innocence, the police handcuffed him and took him to the station. When shown a photo of Chelsea, John insisted that he did not know her and mentioned that he had been drinking, which made it hard for him to provide clear answers. The detectives, however, noticed that he was not so intoxicated that he couldn't understand their questions. They detected alcohol on him and observed his muddy pants. John claimed he had fallen while walking to the bar and insisted he only knew Chelsea from the news. During the interrogation, his demeanor changed frequently, and he claimed he was a victim of false accusations, similar to a previous arrest in 1991. He even made a peculiar remark about being accused in the case of Amber's disappearance, which alarmed the detectives, as they hadn't mentioned Amber's name during the questioning about Chelsea. The investigators showed John a photo of Chelsea and asked him where her body was, but he insisted he didn't know anything. However, when they briefly left the room, John looked at Chelsea's photo and cursed under his breath. Frustrated by the lack of evidence, the detectives had to let him go. Soon after, a report surfaced about an attack on a girl the previous year involving a man who resembled John. On December 27, 2009, 22-year-old Candice Moncayo went for a jog around Lake Hodges. It was a nice day, and she completed her run around 10:30 a.m. At that moment, a tall stranger with brown hair approached her. He knocked her to the ground and used his weight to pin her down. Candice realized he intended to assault her, so she decided to fight back. She got up and elbowed him in the nose with enough force to possibly break it. Seizing the opportunity, she ran away and called 911. Although the police responded to the scene, they couldn't locate the attacker. Investigators suspect that a tall man with a broken nose may be involved, but they believe the incident is more likely to be a robbery than abuse. They are questioning Candice regarding Chelsea's case. They showed her a photo of John, and she immediately recognized him as her attacker. Nevertheless, John's mother, Kathy Osborne, completely denied all allegations against her son. Detectives hope to persuade her to confess to John's crimes by informing her of his other offenses and the evidence they had. They stressed the urgency of finding Chelsea and warned that John posed a threat to others in the community. During an interview with a Justice Department agent, Kathy explained that John was on medication for his mental health, which helped him manage depression and panic attacks. She described him as kind-hearted, despite occasional outbursts of anger. On the day of the attack, he had gone for one of his regular walks, although she did not specify the location. After that, Kathy stopped providing further information. The investigators then circulated John's photo through various media outlets, leading to more witnesses coming forward with testimonies against him. Several claimed to have seen him following Chelsea during her jog, and some even reported that he spoke to them, making them feel uncomfortable. On March 2, 2010, FBI agents began searching for Chelsea using a boat on the south shore of Lake Hodges. During the search, they discovered blonde hair in the mud near the shore. Chelsea's body was ultimately found about 10 feet from where her shoe had been located earlier. Bad weather had previously hindered search efforts. After the discovery, authorities informed Chelsea's family about the tragic news. With the body found and John in custody, prosecutors announced they would pursue the death penalty against him. In response, John's attorneys worked to negotiate a plea deal. They reached an agreement with the San Diego prosecutor. John would assist in locating Amber's body in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. John honored his part of the deal and led investigators to Amber's remains, remaining surprisingly calm and even smoking cigarettes during the process. He indicated a shallow grave but admitted to discarding Amber's clothing and belongings. Ultimately, Amber's body was never found. However, a clump of hair identified as hers was discovered. Carrie, Mo, and David were summoned to the police station, where they learned that some of Amber's remains had been located, but not her entire body. The police and medical personnel could not provide a clear understanding of what had happened to Amber. It became clear that the investigations into Chelsea's and Amber's cases were being managed differently. In response, Amber's mother, Carrie, appeared on the talk show Larry King Live, expressing her frustration about not being updated on her daughter's case and directly urging John to confess to the crimes. After Carrie expressed her disappointment on Larry King's live show about not being informed regarding her daughter's disappearance, the district attorney notified Chelsea's family that John had pleaded guilty in order to avoid the death penalty. He admitted to committing crimes against Amber Dubois and Candice Moncayo, Chelsea's family was understandably upset, but they felt they had no choice but to accept the plea deal. The district attorney knew that publicly announcing John's escape from the death penalty would likely incite anger not only in San Diego but also throughout the state and the country. On April 25, 2010, despite his lawyer's advice to stay silent, John chose to speak out. He asked the judge and his attorneys for permission to appear on TV to publicly apologize to the victims' families. He confessed to his crimes, expressed self-hatred, and conveyed regret for his actions. However, many people remained doubtful of his sincerity. In relation to these cases, a book titled Lost Girls, authored by Kathleen Rother, was published. When the author informed John about the book, he requested that she sign it, expressing his desire to officially confess to his crimes and seek forgiveness. The families of the victims were furious about John's actions. They pointed out that he had previously stated he did not understand remorse, making his attempt to apologize feel insincere. During the sentencing, despite his attorney's suggestion to remain composed, John became emotional. When Carrie, Mo, and David described Amber and her kind personality, John cried repeatedly. They looked him straight in the eye and said that he had taken away their beloved daughter, her bright future and her innocence. David hoped that John's prison experience would be unbearable due to his cellmates. Next, Chelsea's parents, Brent and Kelly, spoke about Chelsea, highlighting her positive impact on the world and her ability to see the goodness in others. According to them, she was always brave, while they considered John to be cowardly for hiding behind his mental illness. They believed he portrayed himself as a victim, even though he was fully aware of his cruel actions when he killed both girls. Brent and Kelly expressed their grief over losing all the memories they could have shared with Chelsea. Brent specifically described John as a monster and a sociopath unworthy of mercy. While they spoke, John looked down, crying, as if showing his regret. When it was Candace's turn to testify, she directed her question at John, asking how his nose had healed. This seemingly innocent question triggered a reaction in him. He growled, bared his teeth, and sat with a wild look on his face. At one point, John turned to his lawyer and claimed that Candace never hit him and was simply lying. In that moment, people saw the true John, not as a victim, but as a monster. During numerous discussions with investigators, he confessed to multiple other crimes, revealing that he had many more victims beyond Amber and Chelsea. He admitted to violently assaulting an escort several times and stalking women, although all of his attacks ultimately failed. Finally, he received 3 consecutive life sentences without the chance of parole. This case sparked outrage not only among residents of San Diego but also around the world, especially since John avoided the death penalty, raising concerns about the justice system. Chelsea's family, motivated to prevent others from going through what their daughter experienced, established the Chelsea Act. This legislation increases penalties, parole restrictions, and oversight for the most serious crimes. Under this act, individuals convicted of child abuse offenses faced life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Afterward, the residents of the city gathered for a candlelight vigil in memory of Amber and Chelsea, praying for their souls to find peace. Judy Anderson did not come to work on the morning of December 26, 2007. She worked at the post office with her friend Linda Thiele, who had known her for many years. They communicated regularly and spent time together on weekends. Judy was known for being a responsible employee who rarely missed shifts without a valid reason. However, that day was different. Linda requested time off from work and went to Judy's house at 9 a.m. to check on her. When Linda arrived, no one was home at that time. As she approached the house, she noticed both of Judy's family cars parked outside, but the house appeared empty. When Linda knocked on the front door, there was no response. After knocking more firmly and checking the door, she discovered it was unlocked, which struck her as odd given the house's outward appearance. Upon entering, she was met by a strange and unpleasant smell. She tried to call family members, but no one answered. As she walked through the first floor and past the basement, she noticed something unusual below. Entering the dark basement, she spotted a man lying on the floor and initially thought he had suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning. As she approached him, she realized he had been shot. In the dim light, she discerned that there were several more bodies in the basement. Since she lacked her mobile phone, she used the family's home phone to call emergency services, 911, to report that she had found 3 bodies in Judy's home. Police arrived at the scene at around 9:30 a.m. and quickly realized that the tragedy was much worse than Linda had anticipated. In the basement, they discovered a couple and their 2 young children, all of whom had been attacked in the head. The small town of Carnation, Washington, was known for its peaceful atmosphere, making the horrific events of that day particularly shocking and ruining Christmas for the community. Around 11 a.m., while forensic teams were working at the scene, Michelle, the daughter of Wayne and Judy, arrived with her boyfriend, Joseph Thomas McEnroe, and attempted to access their trailer. The police needed to speak with them, but from the start, detectives noted their odd behavior. Although the area was clearly marked as a crime scene, neither Michelle nor Joseph seemed to care about the situation, nor did they ask about their family members. This indifference was particularly striking given Michelle's suspicious demeanor. Joseph appeared more vulnerable, nervously confessing to the family's murder from the outset. He expressed genuine remorse, crying and calling himself a monster. Eventually, Michelle also broke down and confessed her role in the murders. Both agreed to cooperate with the investigation, leading detectives to seek the murder weapon. They directed law enforcement to where they had disposed of 2 weapons in a nearby river. When you got there, a team of divers had recovered crucial evidence, which had been sent to the laboratory for analysis. The ballistic tests confirmed that these were the weapons used in the killings. Investigators were left to ponder what had driven such a tragic event within the family. Wayne was known for his ambition. He had been working hard to obtain a good education and build a career, and his dreams had started to come to fruition. After experiencing an unsuccessful first relationship, he was in the process of establishing his personal life. Then Wayne met Judy, whom he later referred to as his soulmate, and together they built a loving family that they cherished. By 2007, they had been happily married for 31 years and were living on their farm. From the start, Judy had dreamed of a family and a joyful marriage, and Wayne was the partner who helped her achieve that. Their home was in the small, close-knit town of Carnation, near Seattle, where everyone knew their family well. They enjoyed friendly relationships with their neighbors, often celebrating holidays together and hosting barbecues. The holiday weekend in December 2007 promised to be just as festive. Over their 30 years of marriage, Judy and Wayne had 3 children, Mary, Scott, and Michelle. At that time, Mary lived in the nearby town of North Bend. She left her family a few years ago to focus on her career. Unfortunately, her progress at work was minimal, and she became ill before the vacation. As a result, she decided to visit her family at a later date once she felt better. Scott Anderson was 32 years old and married to his wife, Erica, who was also 32. Although Scott concentrated heavily on his career, his personal life was stable. The couple had 2 children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. They lived in another nearby town, about a half-hour drive from his parents, and he was a dedicated husband and father. He worked as a builder, while Erica stayed home to manage the household and care for the children. Michelle Anderson was 29 years old and had always been different from her peers, often for negative reasons. She was known as a difficult and argumentative child, and as she grew up, she struggled to find success in her career. Many people in the community see her as a problematic member of the family. However, her brother and sister, Mary and Scott, support her, while their parents hope she will change for the better in the future. Michelle had several unsuccessful relationships, the latest being with her boyfriend, Joseph Thomas McEnroe, who was also 29. They dated for about 5 years. They met on a dating site and quickly moved in together, but they faced challenges in finding stable housing due to their lack of education and the absence of steady jobs. In 2004, they rented a mobile home, which was their only option for affordable living at the time. Neighbors considered them lazy and often referred to them as losers. Michelle and Joseph rarely ventured outside their trailer and generally avoided interactions with others, feeling uncomfortable even during brief conversations. Minor issues, such as a car parked incorrectly in front of their home, could trigger Michelle's anger, leading her to argue loudly, as if she were looking for an opportunity to express herself. People also noticed Michelle's unusual behavior. During episodes of unpredictable aggression, she would suddenly break down but then quickly calm down, which raised concerns about her mental health. Some suggested that she see a psychiatrist. At nearly every meeting with new people, Michelle would bring up money, telling elaborate stories about how she and her family were wealthy, though for some reason, she didn't use that wealth. However, both Michelle and Joseph often appeared unkempt. Many described them as dirty and disheveled, which led others to avoid them. Michelle was very controlling of Joseph, often speaking for him. She considered herself the black sheep of her family, insisting that despite her perceived differences, she was superior to the rest of them. This attitude negatively affected family relationships, leading to frequent conflicts. When she wasn't making up stories about their family's wealth, she would recount how strict her parents were. She often portrayed her childhood as bleak, depicting her father as abusive and her mother as hypocritical. According to her, home life was so unbearable that it pushed her to run away and live independently. Despite the tensions within the family, neighbors often saw Judy visiting her daughter, Michelle, once a month. During these visits, Judy would bring bags of food to help her daughter. She was polite, calm, and friendly, but she never admitted to the allegations of abusing Michelle. In contrast, Michelle would often be rude and yell at her mother, despite her mother's kindness. One of Michelle and Joseph's friends said that their trailer home was very difficult to live in and unfit for habitation. The trailer was in poor condition, with minimal furniture and many broken appliances. Many of the windows were damaged and had been covered with opaque material, barely letting in any light. Michelle mentioned that the windows were covered for privacy, as she did not want outsiders to see into the home. When asked why, she claimed that the neighbors were spying on them and that there had been attempts to break into the trailer when they were away. Michelle reported these incidents to the police, but nothing was found, even with several security cameras nearby. Neighbors were skeptical of her claims, suggesting that no one would want to break in, as there was hardly anything valuable inside, leading them to believe Michelle might have made up the stories to gain attention. The relationship between Michelle and Joseph seemed unusual. Michelle viewed herself as a spiritual mentor, trying to guide Joseph on how to live a good life, but few took her advice seriously. This led to frequent arguments between them. After struggling to pay their land rent, they had to move their trailer. Unable to afford a proper home, they returned to her parents' farm, where her parents offered them shelter. They arrived on December 24, 2007, just before Christmas. Michelle's family had planned the holiday gathering with close friends. Her parents, Judy, aged 61, and Wayne, aged 60, wanted to bring everyone together. Scott, along with his wife and 2 young children, planned to attend the family reunion, while Mary was unable to make it home. While waiting for the guests, Joseph and Michelle stayed in their trailer. It was likely that another conflict occurred, leading to them getting into a quarrel. Unexpectedly, around 4 p.m., they left their trailer carrying guns. Judy was in the backyard wrapping Christmas presents and preparing for guests when Joseph started chatting with her. Meanwhile, Michelle silently approached from behind, armed with a gun. Inside the house, Wayne was reading a newspaper and noticed the situation. Suddenly, Joseph grabbed the weapon and attacked Wayne in the head, killing him instantly. Shortly after, Judy was attacked 3 times. Taking advantage of the chaos, Michelle and Joseph dragged the bodies to the barn behind the house. It was only when the noise drew the attention of neighbors, who lived far away, that the gravity of the situation became clear. Michelle and Joseph quickly cleaned up the blood and tried to erase any evidence of the crime because they had less than an hour before Scott and his family were expected to arrive at around 5 p.m. Soon after, the Scott family arrived, expecting to celebrate Christmas. They were puzzled when Judy and Wayne were not there to greet them, as they were usually caring and eager for their grandchildren's arrival. Michelle explained that they had gone grocery shopping and would be back soon. Unaware of the danger, they went into the living room and didn't notice that their parents' cars were parked outside. As soon as Scott, Michelle's brother, settled onto the sofa, Joseph confronted him. Michelle pulled out the weapon and attacked Scott multiple times in the head, killing him instantly. Erica, 30 years old, stood up in shock but managed to escape with the children. Michelle and Joseph attacked them but missed several times, then ran out of ammunition. While Michelle and Joseph were reloading the gun, Erica managed to lock herself in a room and called 911 at 5:13 p.m. En hung that kong mei, nai kai ko vua ket noi toi tong dai, Joseph de zong veo fom. Erica pleaded with Joseph not to harm the children, but he attacked her in the head and took her phone, smashing it against the wall. This horrifying scene unfolded in front of the terrified children, who were clinging to her. Joseph fired the shot, mistakenly believing that Erica would call for help. Her final cries were recorded as evidence. A police patrol was dispatched, and soon, officers arrived at Judy's home. Michelle greeted them by locking the gate right in front of them. She reluctantly spoke to the officers, insisting that everything was fine and refusing them entry. Unable to access the house, the police had no choice but to leave. When Michelle and Joseph were arrested, they attempted to justify their violent actions. Michelle claimed she was angry at her parents and brother. She stated that Scott owed her a significant amount of money, which he had refused to repay despite her repeated requests over the years. When Michelle sought support from her parents regarding this issue, they ignored her, which fueled her resentment. Additionally, she mentioned enduring physical and emotional abuse from her father for many years. Just before the murder, her mother pressured her to pay rent, expressing frustration over her living situation in a trailer on their farm. However, nobody believed Michelle's claims. Their acquaintances knew that Joseph and Michelle were not in a position to lend money. They only had small amounts, like $3 to $5, while Scott was financially stable and didn't need loans. Additionally, it was hard to believe that their parents, knowing about their financial struggles, would demand rent. Wayne and Judy are hospitable people who have welcomed Michelle and Joseph, provided them with food, and never asked for money in return. Michelle felt that nobody believed her, so she began to change her story. She tried to portray herself as the victim. In her final version, she claimed that her motive for murdering 6 people was jealousy over Scott's success and his relationships with his family and at work, as well as envy of her parents. However, this reasoning does not justify the murder of Olivia and Nathan, young children who had no understanding of the situation and were not responsible for their parents' actions. Michelle argued that her actions were an act of mercy, believing that her nephews would face a harsh world without their parents and that she wanted to spare them from that life. She was also annoyed by the presence of the children while their parents were being attacked. During an interview, Michelle described how she felt humiliated and oppressed by her parents, fabricating increasingly dramatic stories. Even the recorded confession took over 2 hours, detailing the sequence of the attack. On December 2, 2007, Michelle Anderson and Joseph Thomas McEnroe were charged with 6 counts of premeditated murder. At the time, the legal environment in the state made the case particularly high-profile. In another interview, Michelle stated that she wished to be executed, as she found the thought of spending the rest of her life in prison to be a harsher punishment than death. Despite her wishes, the death penalty was not imposed. After the trials, both were sentenced to 6 life terms without the possibility of parole. After the change of governor, the death penalty issue was reconsidered. On September 5, 2013, the Washington State Supreme Court overturned the earlier ruling, leading to a new trial. Michelle was frightened and quickly retracted her previous statements. In January 2015, Joseph appeared in court. His defense claimed he was coerced into committing the crime. They portrayed Michelle as a manipulative individual who had brainwashed Joseph and turned him against her family. They also mentioned his mental illness, which made him susceptible to manipulation. They described Joseph's childhood as tragic and noted that he had been abused by his mother. During his defense, he argued that he had ensured Judy's family died quickly so they would not suffer and attempted to rationalize the killing of the children as an act of mercy. On March 25, 2015, the jury found Joseph guilty of the charges against him. During sentencing, Joseph acted as if he were a victim of manipulation, even modifying his behavior. The prosecutor pointed this out and warned that Joseph was trying to influence the jury's decision by changing how he behaved and spoke. Since the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict on the death penalty, Joseph was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for each murder. 8 years later, in January 2016, Michelle appeared in court once again. The prosecutor's office decided not to pursue the death penalty for her, as Joseph had already received a life sentence. State law requires that all criminals with similar levels of guilt receive equal justice, which applied to both Joseph and Michelle. Therefore, seeking a lesser penalty for Michelle would have been unlawful. After hearing this news, Michelle became emotional and expressed her regret for the crime she had committed. The prosecutor suggested that her tears were motivated by her desire to avoid spending the rest of her life in prison and to obtain a more lenient sentence. The prosecution highlighted that Michelle had repeatedly mentioned financial motives or money-related reasons to justify her actions. It appeared that her main motivation for the crime was to inherit her parents' house. According to the prosecutor, Michelle remained the same ruthless person, and her fluctuating testimonies and blatant lies made her untrustworthy. She accused her family of harsh treatment during the investigation. However, there was no evidence to support her claims. She seemed to be attempting to undermine her family as if the murders alone were not enough to portray herself more favorably. During the trial, new claims emerged. Michelle maintained that she hated Erica just like everyone else did, but she asserted that this hatred stemmed from Erica taking her brother, Scott, away from her. Nevertheless, their already strained relationship indicated that Michelle was lying again. Ultimately, the probable reason for her murder was simply jealousy. During the trial, the jury listened to witness testimonies presented by the prosecution over several weeks. The Supreme Court hearing mirrored the earlier trial of Joseph, who was already in prison. The proceedings were formal. Michelle's older sister, Mary, was among those who spoke. She had been unable to attend a family Christmas gathering due to illness. Later, Mary expressed gratitude for missing the holiday, believing it had saved her life. Michelle confessed that she had been planning the crime against her family for about 10 weeks. However, both she and Joseph made several mistakes, failing to cover their tracks or dispose of the bodies properly. Their claim of getting married in Las Vegas was quickly proven to be false. Despite her emotional confessions, Michelle's true character emerged when she received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. She reacted by screaming at the judge and threatening to sue for poor legal representation. Michelle even demanded to be released so she could hire her own private lawyer, but her request was denied, leading her to accuse the judge of violating her constitutional rights. At present, both Michelle and Joseph are incarcerated in state prisons. The legal process has been lengthy, emotional, and costly, with numerous appeals and strong opposition from their defense teams. The struggle for a lighter sentence continued for years. The prosecutor spent approximately $2 million on the case for both Michelle and Joseph, while Joseph's defense cost around $5 million and Michelle's expenses were even higher. The only consolation for those who financed the legal battle was knowing that these dangerous individuals would never be free again. Anjana Lama Mahat was born on August 26, 1995, in Hitauda, a modest industrial town in south-central Nepal. She was the eldest of 5 children in a financially struggling family. From a young age, Anjana took on the role of helping raise her 3 younger sisters and brother. She also helped with daily chores such as cooking, cleaning, and laundry. Even as a child, Anjana stood out. There was a gentleness in her demeanor that drew others toward her. She had a gift for making people feel at ease, be it classmates, neighbors, or strangers, and she never hesitated to offer a helping hand. Although she wasn't always at the top of her class academically, her teachers often praised her intelligence, drive, and maturity. As she grew older, Anjana blossomed into a striking young woman. Her graceful appearance, paired with a confident yet kind-hearted personality, made her the center of attention wherever she went. She was fun-loving, approachable, and preferred resolving conflicts with calm rather than confrontation. Anjana was especially talented in drawing and often dreamed of becoming an artist or working in fashion and beauty. Yet she knew she couldn't count on financial help. Everything she wanted, she would have to earn on her own. While still in school, she crossed paths with Prajwal Mahat, a charismatic young man just a year older than her. He came from a privileged background, part of the high-caste Kshatriya community, an upper tier in Nepal's traditional social hierarchy. Anjana, on the other hand, belonged to the Tamang ethnic group, which has roots in Mongolian ancestry and often occupies a more marginalized position in society. Prajwal's family, his parents, Pushpa and Kamal Bahadur, were known for their wealth and status. His older brother, Ujjwal, had made a name for himself as a music producer and had even contributed to the promotion of a major Nepali film. One of the most widely recognized songs in Nepal, Suna, featured the production talents of Ujjwal Mahat, Prajwal's older brother. From the moment they met, there had been an undeniable connection between Anjana and Prajwal. Friendship begins to slowly develop into love as they find themselves drawn together by shared interests, passions, and dreams for the future. Despite the depth of their bond, they initially kept their relationship discreet. Both are aware of the differences in society and culture. Anjana's Tamang heritage and modest background clashed with Prajwal's high-caste Kshatriya lineage and his family's elite status. But over time, they began to talk openly about the future and eventually made a decision: they would be together, even if it meant going against their families and centuries of tradition. When the relationship eventually came to light, it ignited a firestorm of disapproval. Both families were furious and immediately forbade further contact. However, amidst all the opposition, there was one person who remained supportive, and that was Ujjwal, Prajwal's brother. He was moved by their determination and saw the genuine love they shared. Wanting to support them, he helped orchestrate a secret wedding and even covered the costs himself. While Ujjwal's actions came from a place of empathy and belief in their bond, the fallout was severe. As soon as news of the marriage became public, it unleashed a wave of outrage and scandal within the Mahat family. In late 2016, at just 21 years old, Anjana officially became Anjana Mahat, while her husband had just turned 22. The early days of their married life were filled with turmoil. With no steady income or permanent housing, the couple was forced to move frequently between inexpensive rental units. Their survival largely depended on Ujjwal's generosity, as Prajwal struggled to find consistent work. His jobs were all short-term and low-paying. In February 2017, Pushpa, Prajwal's mother, reached out to him. They spoke for hours. She urged her son to return home, but he made it clear that he would only return if his wife was included. Eventually, both Anjana and Prajwal would move into the Mahat family's grand home in Lalitpur. At the time, the Mahat household included Kamal Bahadur and Pushpa, their son Ujjwal, his wife Aishwarya, and their young son Santosh. His two older sisters were already married and living with their husbands. For Anjana, stepping into this environment felt like walking into a storm. She could feel the silent judgment. No one said anything outright, but their actions spoke volumes. It was clear she hadn't been welcomed with open arms. Her own parents, still hurt by her decisions, had cut off contact and wouldn't even speak with her on the phone. The emotional weight grew heavier during a major festival when extended relatives, family friends, and business partners of Kamal Bahadur gathered at the estate. While the house buzzed with laughter, Anjana was confined to her room. She wasn't allowed to greet the guests or participate in any of the events. She wasn't considered worthy of being introduced. Still, Anjana carried herself with grace. She never argued, never raised her voice, and always tried to show kindness. She woke early, completed household chores without complaint. Eventually, Kamal Bahadur, perhaps wanting to keep his son by his side, used his influence to find Prajwal a job at a large company. To his credit, Prajwal took the opportunity seriously. He worked hard, showed initiative, and began to build a reputation for himself within the company. Promotions followed, and soon he was earning a stable income, earning praise from supervisors, and establishing a promising future. Life inside the Mahat household was defined by discipline. Responsibilities were assigned to each family member, and even the household staff adhered to the same standards of precision and order. Each morning, the home emptied out as the adults left for their jobs and the children headed off to school. The only person left behind was Anjana. Without formal employment and with little guidance from her in-laws, she found herself adrift. But Anjana wasn't content to remain idle. By May 2017, she finally confided in her husband that she was ready to pursue a long-held dream, opening her own beauty salon. She had already researched potential locations, assessed the neighborhood's demand, studied the market, and prepared a modest business plan. Everything was in place, except the funding. Although Prajwal had started to earn a respectable income and had been saving diligently, it still wasn't enough to launch the business. Hoping for support, he approached his parents with the proposal. But their response was disappointing. They dismissed the idea, expressing doubt about the viability of such a venture. It was at this moment that Ujjwal once again stepped forward. Convinced of Anjana's potential, he offered to fund the project himself. With the necessary capital in hand, Anjana threw herself into the work with unmatched determination. She personally oversaw every detail of the salon's setup, from interior design and branding to selecting services and hiring staff. Within months, the salon was not only operating smoothly but also generating consistent profits. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, and her business became a local favorite. This achievement made those who once doubted her ability begin to reevaluate. Her in-laws began to listen when she spoke, seek her opinion on family matters, and treat her with a level of warmth and consideration that had been absent before. For the first time since her marriage, Anjana felt truly accepted. Yet one unresolved sorrow remained: her parents. Despite the progress she had made in her new life, she had not yet reconciled with them. Her younger brother had recently finished school and was looking for a path forward. Anjana suggested he consider moving to Lalitpur to attend university. She offered to support him, promising he could live with her and Prajwal in the Mahat home. Surprisingly, her in-laws raised no objections. In fact, they were open to the idea and welcomed the prospect of helping a young man pursue a better future. To finalize the arrangement, both families agreed to meet face-to-face. During this meeting, Anjana's parents were able to witness firsthand the environment in which their son would be living. For the first time in years, Anjana reconnected with her mother and father, and the conversations that followed slowly healed the rift. From then on, the two families maintained regular contact. Anjana and Prajwal visited her hometown often, and Anjana began calling her mother almost every day. Her brother enrolled in one of Lalitpur's most reputable universities and was welcomed into the Mahat home with open arms. Meanwhile, a digital transformation was sweeping across Nepal. Social media platforms, especially TikTok, were exploding in popularity. Anjana saw this as an opportunity to further express herself. She began sharing clips from her daily life at the salon, beauty tips, skincare routines, product reviews, and tutorials for fashionable looks. Her graceful demeanor and natural charm quickly resonated with viewers. In no time, her videos began to go viral. Her follower count surged into the tens of thousands, and Anjana emerged as one of the region's most promising online influencers. Audiences were drawn to Anjana's elegance. Her looks were often compared to those of international celebrities. Compliments flooded her social media posts, and her followers trusted her beauty tips without hesitation. Her influence quickly expanded in both the fashion and business worlds. It wasn't long before she caught the eye of a modeling agency. Impressed by her charisma, they began extending invitations to participate in professional photo shoots, promotional campaigns, and even local fashion shows. She embraced each opportunity with gratitude and boldness, gradually becoming a recognizable face in the regional fashion scene. With grace and confidence, Anjana flourished in front of the camera. She is not afraid to try new styles. Bold fashion choices make her stand out. As her portfolio grew, so did her earnings. Modeling, which had begun as a side project, quickly overshadowed her salon business. Eventually, she made the difficult decision to close the salon entirely and commit full-time to her modeling career. Her popularity didn't remain confined to Nepal. Word of her success began to reach international agencies. Some approached her with offers of contracts and collaborations abroad. She and her husband began to consider these opportunities seriously. When the couple shared their plans with both sides of the family, the reactions were mixed. While some relatives expressed concern about the distance, they ultimately supported the couple's ambition and offered to help however they could. Around the same time, in 2018, Ujjwal, Prajwal's older brother and longtime supporter, began suffering from health issues that progressed rapidly. His hearing deteriorated to the point of near total loss, forcing him to step away from his career in audio engineering. Throughout this period, Prajwal stood by his brother, offering emotional support and helping him navigate the many difficulties that came with the sudden loss of livelihood. When news spread that Prajwal and Anjana were planning to move abroad, Ujjwal became even more heartbroken. Things get even more tense when Aishwarya, Ujjwal's wife, enters the picture. Their marriage is an arranged one. Aishwarya comes from a powerful and wealthy family. From the start, she makes no effort to hide her disdain for Anjana. Despite her outward appearance, Aishwarya never truly accepted her sister-in-law. She considered Anjana to be of a lower social class. Her resentment grew with each of Anjana's achievements. Aishwarya became jealous when Anjana entered the modeling world and began to receive praise and admiration. Suddenly, the woman she once despised was the center of attention, admired not only by outsiders but also within the Mahat family. Anjana's in-laws respected her opinions, often praising her dedication and composure. Some even considered her the most successful and admirable member of the family. Meanwhile, Aishwarya felt increasingly marginalized. Unable to contain her anger, she began spreading damaging rumors. She implied to her family that Anjana's fame was not as respectable as it seemed, that the modeling industry had changed her personality. To prove her claim, she circulated provocative pictures of Anjana from swimsuit photo shoots, claiming that they were inappropriate for a married woman and brought shame to the family. Her accusations sowed seeds of doubt. In a house already rife with power struggles, Aishwarya's rumors have begun to change the atmosphere. Aishwarya had repeatedly caused conflict in the Mahat household. However, over time, her dramatic accusations and emotional outbursts began to lose their impact. Every time she tried to cause a split, Anjana's husband, Prajwal, stood by her. His support helped defuse the tension, and gradually, the rest of the family grew tired of Aishwarya's tactics. Her words began to carry less weight. Frustrated, she turned to her husband, Ujjwal, who had once supported Anjana and even helped her and Prajwal start a life together. As his health declined, Ujjwal spent more time at home, isolated and vulnerable. His career as a sound engineer came to an abrupt end due to severe hearing loss. Aishwarya took full advantage of this. In her weakened state, Ujjwal was subjected to her incessant complaints. She described Anjana as a manipulative force, a divisive figure who was now plotting to take Prajwal away for good. When she discovered the couple was planning to move to Canada, it drove her crazy. She whispered to Ujjwal that Anjana's real goal was to separate the brothers, to leave him abandoned during his most fragile years. The thought of losing his younger brother during such a bleak time deeply unsettled him. Slowly, the seeds of suspicion took root. Anjana confided in her parents about the toxic environment she was living in, how Aishwarya was sabotaging her at every opportunity, and the false stories she was spreading. Her mother, though extremely worried, advised her to be cautious. She reminded Anjana to be strong, stay calm, and not engage in conflict. On the afternoon of May 9, 2019, around 4 p.m., a phone call disrupted the Lama family. Anjana's mother answered with the voice of a distraught woman from the Mahat family. She was sobbing, her words were incoherent, her voice was shaking. She begged them to come immediately, offering no explanation other than a sense of urgency and panic. A serious traffic accident had clogged the highway, turning a normally short drive into an agonizing 6-hour journey. By the time Anjana's parents arrived, the scene awaiting them was harrowing. The Mahat residence was cordoned off by police tape. Officers moved methodically through the home while bystanders gathered in hushed confusion. Police cars lined the street, and murmurs filled the air. Near the gate, Anjana's younger brother sat collapsed against a wall, his face buried in his hands, his body racked with sobs. A uniformed officer approached Anjana's father and, in a solemn voice, asked him to come inside. They walked together through the house and climbed the stairs to the second floor. What he witnessed in that room would remain burned into his memory for the rest of his life. On the bed lay the mutilated body of his daughter. Her body had been subjected to unspeakable violence. Her left hand had been severed and discarded on the floor. Her left leg had been nearly cleaved above the knee, the wound deep and precise. Her head, barely attached, rested in a gruesome angle. Her face was so badly disfigured it was almost impossible to recognize her. Overcome with horror, Anjana's father staggered out of the room, the breath knocked from his lungs. Tears blurred his vision as he collapsed into the arms of waiting relatives. Outside, his wife saw the anguish in his eyes. Without a word, she understood what had happened. The pain was immeasurable. But there was no time for mourning. Fueled by shock and rage, Anjana's parents demanded justice. They insisted that every member of the Mahat family be taken into custody, convinced that this was not the act of a single individual but a coordinated and deliberate murder. But then the police shared something that sent a new wave of disbelief washing over them. The killer had already confessed. He was in custody and had begun giving a full statement. And the person behind this unimaginable act wasn't a stranger or a distant enemy. It was Ujjwal, the same man who had once believed in Anjana and stood up for her. The man who had once helped her build the very life he had now destroyed. Over time, the weight of his illness and growing isolation wore heavily on Ujjwal. Constantly exposed to his wife's whispered doubts and cruel insinuations, he began to see his once beloved sister-in-law in a different light. Aishwarya had spent months seeding the idea that Anjana was deceitful and selfish, manipulating the family for her own gain and plotting to take Prajwal far away, perhaps forever. As his health declined and he spent his days alone at home, Ujjwal fixated on these ideas. In his mind, she was stealing his brother, dismantling the very family he had once helped hold together. The love he once had for her turned to anger. Then, one seemingly ordinary afternoon, resentment became action. It was May 9, 2019. Prajwal, his father, and Aishwarya had all left for work. Santosh and Anjana's younger brother were at school. Only 3 people remained in the Mahat household: Anjana, Ujjwal, and their mother, Pushpa, who had taken to her bed with fatigue and was resting. Around midday, Anjana stepped outside to fill a container with water. She intended to care for her beloved garden, completely unaware of the eyes watching her from above. From the second-floor balcony, Ujjwal stood silently, observing her movements. Once she returned inside, Anjana went to her bedroom, stretched out on the bed, and picked up her phone. Meanwhile, Ujjwal walked deliberately to the kitchen and reached for a large knife. He studied it for a moment, then set it down, deeming it insufficient. He proceeded to the storage room where a far deadlier tool awaited, a kukri, the iconic curved blade used by Gurkha soldiers, known for its devastating sharpness. Weapon in hand, he made his way upstairs. Entering the room, he found Anjana still lying on the bed, casually scrolling on her phone. She looked up, perhaps thinking he needed something, and asked what it was. He didn't respond but instead approached slowly, closing the distance between them. It wasn't until she saw the blade being raised that panic set in. Anjana's first instinct was to protect herself. She raised her arm to shield her face, and that was when the first blow struck, severing her hand. Her screams echoed through the home, but no one was there to intervene. Ujjwal struck again and again with such force that the room was soon painted in blood. The final blow, a fatal cut to the neck, nearly decapitated her. Forensic examiners later counted over 15 major wounds on her body, each one severe enough to have been fatal. After the attack, Ujjwal didn't flee or attempt to hide what he'd done. He simply walked to his mother's room and told her what had happened. Terrified, instead of calling emergency services immediately, she contacted her husband and urged him to return home. When he arrived, they called the authorities. When the police arrived, both parents were in denial. They initially claimed they did not know the victim's identity. Given the extent of Anjana's injuries, the story seemed plausible for someone who did not know the family. But investigators quickly became suspicious. They refused to proceed without official identification and contacted Anjana's family. Her parents were summoned to testify. Despite the devastating state of her body, her father recognized her immediately. All members of the Mahat household were considered suspects. Yet, within hours, Ujjwal stepped forward and confessed. He claimed full responsibility for the crime and insisted that he had acted alone. He provided police with a detailed, hour-by-hour account of what had taken place, handed over the bloodied kukri, and even submitted the clothes he had worn during the killing. It was revealed that Ujjwal was so caught up in his rage that he did not even realize that he had severed part of his own finger. He only realized the wound after leaving the room. They had long been aware of the hostility Aishwarya held toward Anjana. They believed that her persistent manipulation, her toxic whispers in Ujjwal's ear, had played a significant role in driving him to the edge. They demanded her arrest, accusing her of incitement and emotional coercion. With no direct evidence linking Aishwarya to the planning or execution of the crime, and with Ujjwal refusing to implicate anyone else, their demands were denied. He remained adamant that he alone was to blame. Determined to protect their eldest son from the brunt of justice, his parents hired one of the most respected and expensive defense attorneys in the country. They were prepared to mitigate the consequences he faced. Their focus was clear: protect Ujjwal at all costs, even if it meant interfering with the trial process. For Prajwal, he was already grieving the unimaginable loss of his wife, but watching his own parents rally around her killer, his own brother, left him shattered. This wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was a moral one. The same man who had once championed his relationship, supported his marriage, and welcomed Anjana into the family had become her murderer. And now, the people who had raised them both were using their wealth and influence to shield that man from accountability. Unable to remain neutral, Prajwal made a choice. He aligned himself with Anjana's grieving parents, refusing to excuse his brother's actions. He demanded the harshest possible sentence. His loyalty to Anjana and her family never wavered. The defense attorney hired by Ujjwal's parents used every tactic to delay the proceedings. Hearings were postponed, procedural obstacles were raised, and witness testimonies were repeatedly challenged. But through it all, Ujjwal held firm in his confession. He refused to alter his account, fearing that shifting blame or minimizing responsibility might pull his wife or parents into the legal storm. His loyalty to them remained intact, even in the face of life imprisonment. 2 years passed before the court finally reached a verdict. The trial was long, grueling, and emotionally draining for all involved. Ujjwal Mahat was found guilty on all counts. The court sentenced him to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Ujjwal's legal team quickly filed an appeal, hoping to reduce the severity of the sentence with a new defense strategy. This time, they argued that his declining mental health had played a critical role in the crime. They claimed that his rapid hearing loss, combined with the psychological trauma of losing his career, had created an emotional spiral that clouded his judgment and triggered the violent act. The court responded by ordering a comprehensive series of psychiatric evaluations. Over the following weeks, mental health professionals conducted interviews, assessments, and psychological testing. Ujjwal was found to be mentally competent, fully aware of his actions, and capable of understanding the consequences at the time of the crime. The appeal was denied. His original sentence stood. Ujjwal would serve the rest of his life behind bars. Meanwhile, Prajwal remained in Nepal throughout the entire legal process. He attended every hearing, offered comfort to Anjana's parents, and even testified in court against his own brother. Only after justice had been served did he allow himself to leave. Fulfilling the dream he and Anjana had once shared, Prajwal boarded a plane to Canada, a journey they had planned together in happier times.